In 1999, psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabrez ran a simple experiment. They asked people to watch a short video of two teams passing basketballs. One team wore white shirts and the other wore black. The viewers had one task: count how many times the players in white passed the ball. While most viewers could complete the task, something strange happened. During the video, a person in a full gorilla costume walked through the scene, stopped, beat their chest, and walked out. About half of the people watching did not see the gorilla at all. They were so focused on counting passes that they missed something obvious. This result surprised many people. How can someone miss a gorilla in the middle of a scene? The answer lies in a concept called inattentional blindness. This happens when we fail to see something in plain view because we focus our attention elsewhere. The brain chooses what to notice and what to ignore, based on what it thinks matters at that moment. When people focus hard on counting passes, they filter out anything not related to that task, even a gorilla. The Invisible Gorilla Study shows how attention works. We often believe we see everything around us, but our attention works more like a spotlight. It focuses on one area and leaves the rest in shadow. When we direct that spotlight toward one task, other things can slip past us without us even noticing. This is not a flaw in the brain. It is how the brain manages limited resources. Paying attention to everything would overwhelm us. Imagine driving a car. You watch the road, scan for signs, and keep track of other cars. But if you focus too hard on finding a street sign, you might not notice a pedestrian stepping into the street. Your eyes may look in their direction, but your mind does not register the person. That is inattentional blindness in real life. It can cause mistakes, even accidents, without you ever knowing something was missed. This effect does not just apply to sight. It can happen with hearing, touch, and even memory. For example, a nurse focusing on checking a patient's chart might not notice an alarm sounding in the room. In a courtroom, a witness might swear they saw something, unaware that their attention was elsewhere during the key moment. Our confidence in what we notice often does not match the truth. We feel sure we saw or heard something, or that we would have noticed if something unusual had happened. But the Invisible Gorilla Study proves otherwise. Inattentional blindness also raises questions about how we design systems, tools, and environments. In aviation, pilots go through checklists before takeoff, but if they become too focused on one item, they might miss something else that is just as important. That's why teams use procedures that spread attention across multiple people. In hospitals, similar ideas apply. One nurse might check vital signs while another handles medication. This division lowers the chance of missing something critical. The concept also has lessons for education. Students who multitask often believe they can watch a lecture and browse their phones at the same time. But they miss parts of both. The brain can switch between tasks, but it cannot focus on two things at once. Each switch costs time and focus. Inattentional blindness shows us that attention has limits. We do best when we give one task our full focus. This idea also changes how we think about memory. Many people believe that memory works like a camera, recording everything. But memory depends on what we notice. If you do not notice something, you will not remember it later. You cannot recall a detail you never took in. The brain stores what it thinks matters, not everything in view. Take the example of a security guard watching a screen. If the guard focuses on a specific corner of the video feed, they might not see someone entering from another area. Even though the screen shows everything, the mind does not. Attention guides perception, and perception feeds memory. If attention misses something, so does memory. We often overestimate our ability to notice the unexpected. People say, "I would have seen that," or "I never miss things like that." But the study shows that even a gorilla can walk through the middle of a scene without us seeing it. This mismatch between confidence and performance matters in many jobs, like law enforcement, driving, or surgery, where missing a detail can have serious effects. One reason this happens is that the brain fills in gaps. If we do not notice something, the brain often assumes nothing important was missed. This leads to what researchers call the illusion of attention. We feel like we are aware of more than we actually are. That illusion can make us trust our senses too much. When things go wrong, we often look for external causes, not realizing that our attention simply missed something. Training and awareness can help reduce these problems. For example, teaching people about inattentional blindness makes them more aware of their limits. It does not stop the effect, but it can change how people approach tasks. A surgeon who knows about the risk might double-check their work. A driver might pause before turning, even if they think the road is clear. Awareness leads to better habits. The invisible gorilla study has also influenced how we understand eyewitness testimony. Jurors often believe that a witness who sounds confident must be accurate. But if the witness was focusing on something else, they might have missed key parts of the scene. They are not lying, they just never saw the thing in question. Confidence does not always equal correctness. Inattentional blindness is not a rare glitch. It is part of how all brains work. It allows us to function in a busy world by focusing on what matters most in the moment. But it also means we need to respect the limits of attention. Whether we are crossing a street, reading a chart, or watching a video, we must remember that seeing is not the same as noticing. Sometimes the gorilla walks by and we never even know it. In 1974, psychologists Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer studied how the words we hear can change the way we remember events. They showed people a short video of a car crash. Afterward, they asked the viewers one simple question: how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? For some people, the word hit was changed to smashed, collided, bumped, or contacted. The responses changed depending on the word used. People who heard smashed gave higher speed estimates than those who heard hit. A single word changed how fast they thought the cars were going. This study showed that memory is not a fixed record of what happened. It can change when we receive new information. The wording of a question can affect what we remember and how we describe it later. When the word smashed was used, many people not only guessed higher speeds, they also said they saw broken glass even though there was none in the video. Their memories added details that matched the more violent word. This is known as the Misinformation Effect. It happens when false or misleading information changes a person's memory of an event. The person does not know they were influenced. They often feel sure their memory is accurate. This effect can happen in small ways, like misremembering a color, or in large ways, like recalling events that never occurred. Memory is not like a video camera. It does not play back the same way each time. Instead, the brain rebuilds memories using bits of real and suggested information. One reason this happens is that the brain tries to make sense of what it experiences. If someone sees a car crash and then hears the word smashed, their brain may adjust the memory to match what smashed suggests. That word might trigger mental images of broken glass, loud noise, or damage. These images become part of the memory, even if they were not there in the first place. The person believes the memory is real because it feels real. This has serious effects in situations where memory is important. In a courtroom, a witness might hear lawyers or police use strong words like smashed or slammed. These words could change how the witness later describes what they saw. If the person originally saw a minor bump between two cars, they might start to remember it as a serious crash. This can affect judgments about guilt or innocence. The misinformation effect can also shape how people recall everyday events. Imagine a child who sees a dog bark once. Later, someone asks, "Did the dog growl at you?" The child might start to remember the dog as aggressive. Over time, the child could become afraid of dogs, even though the original event was mild. The new detail, a growl, did not happen, but the suggestion planted it in memory. This does not mean that all memories are false. Most of the time, our memories work well enough for daily life, but they are vulnerable to change, especially when we are unsure or when a suggestion fills in a gap. The brain uses context to complete memories, just like it uses context to understand language. If someone says, "I saw the man with the knife," our brain builds a picture with a knife, even if no knife was shown. The Loftus and Palmer study changed how scientists understand memory. It showed that memory is reconstructive. Each time we recall an event, we may change it slightly. New thoughts, feelings, or outside suggestions can become part of the memory. We might not notice the changes. We might even grow more confident in the false parts over time. This is why eyewitness testimony is less reliable than people think. A person can sound sure and still be wrong. Even simple suggestions can change memory. If you ask someone, "Did you see the yield sign?" they might say yes, even if it was a stop sign. The question includes a detail that guides the answer. If the person does not remember the sign clearly, they might accept the suggestion and update their memory. Later, they will say they saw a yield sign and believe it. This can happen within minutes, hours, or even weeks after the event. The brain stores memory in a way that allows flexibility. This helps us adjust to new information. But it also means our memories can be rewritten without us realizing it. If someone repeats a false detail many times, the brain may treat it as fact. This is how rumors spread and how false memories take hold. People may even remember entire events that never happened, like being lost in a mall or taking a hot air balloon ride, just because someone suggested it often enough. Police, lawyers, and teachers now use this knowledge to avoid leading questions. Instead of asking, "Did you see the red car speed away?" they ask, "What did you see?" This gives people a chance to recall the event without planting ideas. It helps keep the memory closer to what actually happened. Technology has also revealed how the brain handles memory. Brain scans show that the same areas light up when we recall an event and when we imagine one. This overlap helps explain why false memories feel real. The brain does not always label memories by their source. It remembers the story, but not always where the story came from. The Misinformation Effect also shows how powerful language is. A single word can guide what someone sees in their mind. Smashed implies force. Hit sounds lighter. Even though the video stays the same, the words change what people take away from it. This matters in journalism, education, and therapy, any place where memory and language meet. We cannot stop the brain from filling in gaps, but we can understand how it works and take steps to protect against distortion. Repeating details right after an event, writing things down, and asking neutral questions all help. Teaching people about the misinformation effect makes them more aware of how memory can shift. The Loftus and Palmer study started with a simple test using a film clip and a few questions. But it revealed something deep about human thought. We remember with our brains, not with cameras. And our brains want stories that make sense, even if that means changing what we once saw. In 1998, psychologists Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin conducted an unusual experiment. They wanted to test how much people notice about the world around them, especially during everyday interactions. In their study, an experimenter approached a person on the street and asked for directions. During the conversation, two people carrying a large door walked between them, blocking the view for a few seconds. While the door passed, the original experimenter quietly stepped out, and a different person, wearing different clothes, with a different face, voice, and body shape, took his place and continued the conversation. Many of the people giving directions did not notice the switch. They kept talking as if nothing had happened. This is a clear example of change blindness. Change blindness is when people fail to notice large changes in their environment, especially when the change happens during a visual disruption, like a brief moment of distraction. It shows how much we rely on a stable view of the world and how often our minds fill in details we assume are still the same. We think we see everything around us clearly, but much of what we see is based on assumptions and expectations. In the door experiment, the swap took place in plain sight, yet most people did not detect it. The conditions were not extreme. The people involved were face-to-face, talking directly, and the change involved a human being, not just a small object in the background. Still, about half of the participants failed to notice that the person standing in front of them had changed. This surprises many people because we assume we would notice such an obvious switch. One reason for this blindness is how the brain manages attention. We focus only on a small part of our visual field at any time. Most of what we think we see is actually the brain filling in the gaps with guesses based on context and prior knowledge. This is efficient. It saves effort and helps us focus on important tasks, but it means we often miss things we assume we would catch. The brain doesn't treat every detail as important. When talking to a stranger, we focus on the conversation, not on memorizing their face or voice. We may register that the person is male, of average height, and wearing a blue shirt, but we rarely store enough detailed features to spot a switch unless something stands out. The person who takes over the conversation may fit the general outline we formed, and our brain accepts the change without question. Imagine you're helping someone in a store who asks you where to find a product. Halfway through the question, the person ducks behind a shelf, and someone else pops up in their place. If their voice is similar and their general appearance matches, you might not notice. Your brain assumes it's the same person because the context hasn't changed. The flow of the interaction continues smoothly, and you don't expect someone to switch places mid-conversation. This kind of blindness also applies to other parts of daily life. In films, editors rely on this effect to make cuts that audiences won't notice. A character's position may shift slightly between shots, or a cup might move from one hand to another. As long as the main story continues, most viewers do not catch these details. The brain smooths over the differences and focuses on the overall scene. In real life, change blindness can have serious consequences. A witness to a crime might fail to notice changes in a suspect's clothing or face if those changes happen gradually or during a distraction. In high-stress environments like airports or hospitals, workers might overlook important updates if they are not clearly highlighted. A nurse might not spot that a patient's monitor has changed settings if the screen layout remains mostly the same. It's not just visual changes that go unnoticed. We can also miss changes in sound, tone, or other sensory details. But visual change blindness has been studied more because it's easier to test. Researchers use images that flicker between two versions with a short blank screen in between. People often stare at the images for several seconds without spotting major changes, like a missing building or a changed object, until they finally catch it. The effect becomes stronger when the change involves something outside our focus. In the street experiment, the people giving directions were likely focused on the map or on remembering landmarks, not on studying the face of the person they were helping. Because their attention was elsewhere, their brain did not fully store the original person's features. When the new person stepped in, the brain used its rough sketch to judge the situation and found no reason to flag a difference. Another factor is social expectations. In normal conversations, we don't expect people to change mid-sentence. Our social rules tell us that this kind of switch shouldn't happen, so we're not prepared to notice it. The brain is more likely to accept what seems stable than to raise an alarm over something that doesn't fit expectations. This mental shortcut usually works well, but it creates blind spots. Age and attention levels can affect how likely someone is to experience change blindness. Older adults and people under stress or distraction may be more prone to missing changes, but even young, alert people in full daylight miss big changes when their attention is elsewhere. The blindness is not due to bad vision or poor memory. It comes from the way the brain filters information. People tend to believe they are more observant than they really are. They think they would notice if someone switched places in front of them or if a major object disappeared from a photo. But the evidence from many studies shows this is not the case. The mind is not designed to track every change. It works by creating a stable view of the world and only updating it when something breaks that stability. Knowing this can lead to better design in areas like safety signs, alarms, and user interfaces. Changes need to be clear and noticeable, not subtle or hidden. In safety-critical jobs, systems can be built to reduce reliance on memory and attention. Pilots and surgeons often use checklists and standardized steps to catch changes that the brain might otherwise miss. Change blindness is not a flaw. It's a side effect of how the brain works to manage information efficiently. But it reminds us that our view of the world is not as detailed or complete as we like to think. We see enough to get by, but we miss more than we realize, even when we're looking straight at it. In 1995, psychologists Henry Roediger and Kathleen McDermott ran a study that showed how easily people can form false memories. They gave participants a list of words to remember. Each list had words that were all closely related in meaning. For example, a list might include bed, pillow, blanket, tired, dream, and nap. After studying the list, people were asked to recall the words they had seen. Many people remembered the word sleep, even though it was never on the list. They felt confident it had been there. The word fit with the others so well that their minds filled it in. This experiment became known as the DRM paradigm, named after Deese, Roediger, and McDermott. James Deese first ran a version of the test in the 1950s. Roediger and McDermott brought it back and confirmed how strong the effect was. Their work showed that memory does not just record facts, it also builds connections. When those connections are strong, the brain can create a memory that feels real, even if it never happened. False memories happen when we recall something that did not occur. We are not lying or making it up on purpose. Instead, the brain uses related ideas to form what feels like a true memory. This can happen when we think back to a past event, when we try to recall a list of words, or when someone asks a leading question. The brain stores information in networks. Words and ideas that are related sit close together in memory. When one gets activated, it can trigger others nearby. In the DRM study, the word sleep was strongly related to the words on the list. Thinking about bed and dream brings sleep to mind. Even as the brain didn't see the word, it may still treat it as part of the group. When people try to recall the list, sleep seems familiar. That feeling of familiarity can lead to a false memory. A key detail is that people don't just guess. They often feel sure. Some even insist that they remember seeing or hearing the word. This confidence shows how memory can feel reliable even when it's not. In the Roediger and McDermott study, about 80% of participants recalled a false word at least once, and many rated their memory of it as strong. The effect was not rare or subtle. It was common and robust. This finding challenges the idea that memory works like a recording. Instead, it works like a reconstruction. When we remember, we don't press play, we rebuild. The brain uses fragments of past experience, knowledge, and context to piece together a story. That story may be accurate, but it may also contain errors. The more natural the false piece feels, the more likely the brain is to include it. Imagine someone asks you what you had for breakfast last Sunday. You don't recall the meal clearly, but you know your usual habits. You usually eat toast and coffee. So your brain fills in that detail, and you say toast and coffee. You may be right, but But if you had cereal that day, you now have a false memory. You didn't try to lie. You relied on what seemed most likely. False memories can also happen in group settings. One person shares their version of a story, and others begin to adopt parts of it. Over time, everyone agrees on details that may not be true. This is called memory conformity. It shows how social influence can shape what we believe we remember. Just hearing someone else describe an event in a certain way can shift our own memory of it. This has important implications for eyewitness testimony. In legal settings, a witness may be confident about what they saw, but that does not guarantee accuracy. If they discuss the event with others, hear questions with suggestive wording, or think about related ideas, they may recall things that never happened. Even if the false memory is small, a detail about clothing, timing, or location, it can affect a case. The DRM effect helps explain why this happens. It shows how closely related words or ideas can sneak into memory and feel just as real as actual experiences. And because the brain relies on meaning, not exact wording, even a clear, educated person can fall into this trap. Memory for the gist is often strong, while memory for exact details is weaker. We remember the overall sense of what happened, but not every item on the list. This also applies to children, who may be more vulnerable to forming false memories when asked leading questions. A child who is asked repeatedly whether someone touched them during a medical exam may begin to believe that it happened, even if it didn't. Their mind connects related ideas, doctor, touch, exam, and forms a memory that seems real. Repetition strengthens the effect. The more often a person thinks about the false detail, the more familiar it feels. The same principle explains why advertisements can affect how we remember past experiences. If an ad reminds you of fun, friends, and summer, you might start to believe you once had a great time using that product, even if you never did. The brain links those ideas together and forms a memory that fits the story. You don't remember the event itself. You remember the feeling, and the brain fills in the rest. Roediger and McDermott's work led to many follow-up studies. Researchers have tested whether warning people helps. They tell participants that some of the words they recall might be false. This reduces the effect slightly, but does not eliminate it. People still remember non-presented words, even when they try to be careful. This shows how deep the connection between related ideas runs. Other research has looked at brain activity. When people recall true and false memories, similar areas in the brain light up. This makes it hard to tell the difference based on brain scans alone. Only the strength of the signal or the pattern of activation may differ. But to the person remembering, both memories feel the same. False memory is not a rare error. It is a built-in feature of how the brain works. It allows us to be flexible, to use what we know to fill in gaps and to respond quickly. But it also means we must be careful. The mind favors meaning over precision. It builds stories from ideas, not just facts. Roediger and McDermott's study used simple word lists, but the effect applies to much more. From casual conversations to courtroom evidence, false memories shape how we understand the past. They remind us that what we recall with confidence is not always what truly happened. And they show that even when we trust our minds, we can be wrong in ways we never notice. In the 1990s, psychologist Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues studied how people remember past experiences. They found something surprising. People do not judge an experience by adding up all the moments and dividing by how long it lasted. Instead, they tend to focus on 2 points: the most intense moment, good or bad, and the moment it ended. This became known as the peak-end rule. It explains why some short experiences seem better in memory than longer ones, and why painful or unpleasant events are sometimes remembered as less bad than they were. In one study, participants placed their hands in cold water. In the first trial, They kept their hand in water at 14 degrees Celsius for 60 seconds. In the second trial, they kept their hand in the same cold water for 60 seconds, but then continued for another 30 seconds while the water warmed slightly to 15 degrees. When asked which trial they preferred to repeat, most chose the second one, even though it lasted longer and included the same amount of intense cold. The reason? The second trial ended on a slightly less painful note. The end softened the memory. This rule shows that people do not remember experiences the way a stopwatch or data recorder would. The brain does not treat each moment as equal. Instead, it pays more attention to the parts that stand out and the final impression. This makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. It is more useful to remember the best or worst part of a past event and how it ended than to remember every second in detail. Think of a vacation. You may spend 7 days traveling. Most of the trip might feel average. Some good meals, some delays, a few fun sights. But if one day stands out as especially joyful or stressful, that day will carry more weight in your memory. And if the last day ends well, perhaps with a smooth return flight or a quiet evening by the sea, the whole trip may feel better when you think back on it. Even if the earlier part of the vacation had rough moments, a strong finish can shape the overall memory. The same idea applies to negative experiences. A person might undergo a medical test that lasts 30 minutes. If the test includes a sudden spike in pain near the end, that pain will color how the whole test is remembered. On the other hand, if the test ends with a more comfortable stretch, the memory might feel less unpleasant, even if the total pain was the same or more. This can lead to decisions that seem strange at first. People may choose the longer procedure if it ends on a better note. The peak end rule helps explain why people sometimes repeat uncomfortable experiences. If the most painful moment was short and the end was calm, the brain may file the memory as manageable. This is useful in healthcare, where doctors may plan treatments to taper off gently, knowing that the end of the experience will shape the memory more than its full duration. The rule also applies to customer service. A long wait at a store may be forgiven if the staff at the end is kind and helpful. The overall experience might be remembered positively if the last part leaves a good impression. On the other hand, a visit that starts well but ends with a rude interaction can leave a bad memory. Even if most of it went smoothly, the final moments matter more than we often realize. In relationships, the peak end rule can affect how people remember conversations or time spent together. One heated argument can overshadow hours of calm discussion. A warm goodbye can leave a strong emotional imprint that makes the time feel well spent. This does not mean that everything else is forgotten, but the way we store and recall the experience leans toward those peak and end points. Teachers and presenters can use this insight to plan lessons or talks. People are more likely to remember the most engaging part of a lecture and how it wraps up than the total time spent listening. If the ending is strong and clear, it can boost how the whole session is judged. The same goes for performances, meetings, or interviews. Finishing well can shape how the entire interaction is recalled. One challenge with the peak end rule is that it can lead to distorted memories. A film that is dull for 2 hours but ends with an exciting final scene may be remembered as better than it was. A meal that ends with a disappointing dessert may color the memory of a great dinner. Because we do not average the whole experience, our memories can mislead us when we try to compare options. This becomes clear in long-term decisions. People may stay in jobs or relationships because their memory focuses on a few peak moments rather than the everyday reality. They may choose future experiences based on how previous ones ended, not on how good they were overall. This is not always a mistake, but it can lead to choices that don't match actual long-term enjoyment or well-being. Marketers sometimes use the peak-end rule to shape customer memories. A brand might create one powerful moment in an ad or design a product experience with a strong final step. These standout parts can make the whole process seem better. Even if other parts are average, a peak or smooth ending can boost satisfaction. Kahneman and his team found that the remembering self often overrules the experiencing self. What we remember about an event may guide our future choices more than how we actually felt while it happened. In other words, memory can steer behavior more than moment-by-moment experience. If the memory is shaped by peaks and ends, so are the decisions that follow. This has wide implications. In medicine, for example, understanding how people recall pain can help design better treatment plans. In service industries, companies can focus on finishing experiences well, knowing it will influence how customers feel about them later. In education, teachers might organize lessons to build to a clear, engaging end that stays in students' minds. The peak-end rule helps us understand why memory does not always line up with logic. It shows that duration neglect is common. We forget how long something lasted if the peaks and the end stand out. This helps explain choices in entertainment, travel, relationships, and work. It reminds us that memory is not a full record. It is a set of highlights. The way something ends and the moments that rise above the rest shape what we carry forward. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin-Kruger published a study that revealed a common pattern in how people judge their own skills. They found that people who perform poorly on tasks often think they did well. At the same time, those who perform well often underestimate how well they did. This became known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It shows that a lack of skill not only leads to mistakes, but also prevents people from recognizing those mistakes. In simple terms, people who know the least about a subject are often the most confident in their knowledge. The researchers ran several experiments. In one, they gave participants a test on grammar, logic, or humor. After the test, they asked each person to guess how well they had done. The people who scored in the bottom group rated themselves far above average. They believed their understanding was solid, but their test results showed that they struggled with the task. On the other hand, the top performers often gave themselves lower scores than they earned. They assumed that if the task felt easy for them, it must have been easy for others as well. This mismatch between skill and self-evaluation happens because the same ability needed to do a task well is also needed to judge how well you are doing. When someone lacks a skill, they are not just missing the ability to perform, they also miss the ability to see where they are going wrong. They do not know what they do not know. This is why people who have only just started learning something can feel overly confident. Without enough experience or knowledge, they can't see the full picture. Think of someone learning to play chess. After winning a few games against other beginners, they might believe they are quite good. They know the rules, they understand how the pieces move, and they've seen a few common strategies. But they don't yet realize how deep the game is. They haven't studied opening theory or learned how to plan for the endgame. Still, their early wins give them confidence. They feel like they understand the game well, more than they actually do. This pattern appears in many areas of life. A student may overestimate their grasp of a topic after reading a summary or watching a video. They feel confident because the material seemed clear, but when tested, they can't apply the knowledge or explain it in their own words. A driver may feel sure of their skills after years without an accident, but they may ignore the habits they've developed, like speeding or not using turn signals. A manager might believe they're a good leader because no one complains, not realizing that employees feel uncomfortable giving honest feedback. In these cases, confidence does not match competence. That's the core of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's not about arrogance or ego. Often, people are unaware of their limitations. they don't realize how much more there is to learn, and they assume that what they know is enough. At the same time, people who have studied a subject deeply may see all the complexity and uncertainty. They may hesitate to speak with full confidence because they know what can go wrong. The Dunning-Kruger effect can also lead to problems in group settings. If someone with low skill is confident and speaks forcefully, others may follow their lead. This can steer a group in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, people with more knowledge may hold back, unsure whether their views will be accepted. In this way, poor judgment can spread if no one challenges it. This effect is also common in hiring or evaluations. A person may present themselves well in an interview, speaking with certainty about their strengths, but that confidence might mask a lack of depth. The interviewer may take the person's self-assessment at face value and miss signs of inexperience. On the flip side, someone who is more skilled may give cautious answers and downplay their knowledge, fearing they sound too sure of themselves. Awareness of the Dunning-Kruger effect can help people check their own assumptions. It's easy to feel confident when starting something new. The first few steps are clear and progress feels fast, but that early confidence often fades as the complexity of the subject becomes clear. This is common in learning. At first, someone may think, "I've got this." Later, they realize how much more there is to learn and feel less sure. That drop in confidence is not a failure. It's a sign of growing understanding. This process often appears as a curve. At the beginning, people know little but feel confident. As they learn more, their confidence drops because they see what they've missed. With continued practice, both skill and confidence rise again, but more slowly. This curve shows why people with little experience may feel more sure of themselves than people with much more training. It also shows why humility can be a sign of wisdom. One example is language learning. A beginner who learns a few phrases may feel excited and eager to speak. They may say they're almost fluent. But as they begin to study grammar and vocabulary in depth, they realize how much they don't know. They may stop calling themselves fluent and instead say they're still learning. They now see the gaps in their knowledge that they once didn't notice. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not limited to individuals. It can affect whole organizations. If leaders overestimate their grasp of a market, they may take risky actions based on weak information. If a team assumes it understands a client's needs after one meeting, it may build the wrong solution. In both cases, people act with confidence, unaware that their knowledge is too shallow to support their decisions. The effect does not mean that everyone with low skill is always overconfident. Some people are aware of their limits, and it does not mean experts always lack confidence. Many experts grow into their roles and learn to balance humility with clear knowledge. But the pattern holds often enough to be a concern, especially when people rely on self-assessment without outside feedback. One way to reduce the Dunning-Kruger effect is to seek feedback. Honest, specific feedback helps people calibrate their skills. Testing yourself, asking for reviews, or comparing your performance to a clear standard can reveal gaps you might not notice. Another way is to keep learning. The more you explore a subject, the more you see its depth. This helps build accurate self-awareness over time. Dunning and Kruger's work helped explain why people sometimes speak with great confidence, even when they're wrong. It also showed why real expertise often comes with caution and a sense of what's still unknown. The more people learn, the more they realize how much there is to learn. And that shift in thinking, from certainty to curiosity, is part of becoming skilled. In 1981, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman studied how the way choices are presented affects the decisions people make. They found that people respond differently to the same option depending on how it is framed. If a choice is presented in terms of gains, people tend to avoid risk. But if it is framed in terms of losses, people become more willing to take risks, even when the two choices mean the same thing in terms of actual outcome. This is known as the framing effect. The researchers gave people a simple scenario. Imagine a disease outbreak is expected to kill 600 people. 2 programs are proposed to fight the disease. In one version of the experiment, the options are framed positively, focusing on how many lives will be saved. In another version, the same options are framed negatively, focusing on how many people will die. In the positive frame, participants choose between Program A, where 200 people will be saved for sure, and Program B, where there is a 1/3 chance that all 600 will be saved, and a 2/3 chance that no one will be saved. Most people choose Program A. They prefer the certainty of saving 200 lives. In the negative frame, the same programs are presented this way. Program C will result in 400 people dying for sure. Program D offers a 1/3 chance that no one will die and a 2/3 chance that all 600 will die. Most people now choose Program D. They prefer the gamble over the sure loss. Notice that Program A and Program C are the same. If 200 people are saved, 400 people die. Program B and Program D are also the same in terms of probability and outcome, but people choose differently depending on how the problem is worded. The only thing that changes is the frame. This shows that decisions are not always based on logic or careful analysis. People are influenced by how the information feels. Saving lives sounds better than losing lives, even when the numbers are the same. The frame sets the emotional tone. Gains feel safe. Losses feel threatening. That emotional reaction can shift the decision. This effect appears in many real-life situations. In healthcare, a doctor might describe a surgery as having a 90% survival rate or a 10% mortality rate. The numbers are equal, but patients often feel more comfortable when the doctor uses the survival frame. They may agree to the procedure when it sounds positive and reject it when it sounds negative. In business, a company might say a product is 95% fat-free instead of contains 5% fat. The positive frame makes the product sound healthier, even though the content is the same. A salesperson might say, "This plan saves you $100 a month," rather than, "This plan costs $900 a year." People respond better to the version that highlights the gain. Framing also plays a role in politics and policy. A tax cut might be described as letting you keep more of your paycheck or reducing government revenue. The first frame appeals to personal gain. The second frame may raise concerns about public services. Both are accurate, but each one directs attention in a different way. Politicians, marketers, and advocates use frames to influence how people see an issue. The reason the framing effect works is because people do not evaluate outcomes in a neutral way. They evaluate them in terms of reference points. In most cases, the reference point is the status quo, how things are right now. Gains are things that improve on the current situation. Losses are things that make it worse. People dislike losses more than they like equivalent gains. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. This idea, called loss aversion, is a key part of prospect theory, developed by Kahneman and Tversky. The framing effect shows that even small changes in wording can cause people to make different choices. Imagine a restaurant menu that says includes a free dessert versus one that says dessert valued at $0. Both give the same benefit, but the word free feels more appealing. In another example, a car ad might highlight 5-year bumper-to-bumper protection instead of coverage expires after 5 years. The frame affects how secure the offer seems. Framing also changes how people think about risk. When an outcome is framed as a gain, people prefer the sure thing. When it's framed as a loss, they're more open to taking a chance. This shift can affect major decisions like whether to invest, take medical treatment, or accept a job offer. The same person may choose differently depending on how the options are described. The effect is not limited to words. Visual frames can also guide decisions. A graph showing rising income over time might suggest improvement. The same data shown with a flat line might suggest stagnation. The choice of colors, scales, or starting points can create different frames. Even the order in which options are listed can change which one seems most appealing. People are usually unaware that the frame has influenced them. They believe they made a rational choice, but repeated studies show that when you change the frame, you often change the choice. This matters in public communication, where the way data is shared can steer opinions. For example, if news coverage frames a protest as disruptive versus peaceful, it may shift how the audience feels about the cause. The framing effect also shows why it's hard to stay neutral when presenting information. The choice of words always carries some spin, even if unintentional. Saying climate crisis versus climate change, or gun control versus gun safety, suggests different views. Each term highlights a different aspect of the issue, and those differences shape how people respond. In courtrooms, lawyers often use framing when presenting arguments. A defense attorney might frame a client's actions as defending themselves rather than attacking another person. A prosecutor might frame the same actions as threatening a victim. Jurors may hear the same facts, but interpret them differently based on the frame. Education and training can help people spot framing effects. When individuals are aware of how wording influences thinking, they can take a step back and ask, are the options truly different or just described in different ways? Is the emotional reaction coming from the facts or from how they're framed? Some organizations use neutral language to reduce bias. In medicine, informed consent forms often include both positive and negative frames. For example, a form might say a treatment has a 70% chance of working and a 30% chance of not working. This balance helps patients make better decisions by showing both sides clearly. The framing effect is powerful because it uses natural patterns in human thinking. People react to how choices are presented, not just to the content itself. That reaction often happens quickly, without deep analysis. The frame draws attention to certain outcomes and away from others. And once a person's attention is fixed on a gain or a loss, their preference follows. In 1974, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman studied how people make estimates when they don't know the answer. They found that people rely on an initial number, or anchor, even if it has nothing to do with the question. That starting number pulls their estimate closer to it. This is known as anchoring bias. It shows how easily people can be influenced by information that should have no effect on their judgment. In one version of the experiment, participants watched a wheel with numbers spin like a roulette wheel. The wheel stopped at a random number between 0 and 100. Then participants answered a question. Is the percentage of African countries in the United Nations higher or lower than that number? After giving their answer, they estimated the actual percentage. The number from the wheel had no link to the real answer. It was chosen at random, but it still had a strong effect. People who saw a high number on the wheel gave higher estimates. People who saw a low number gave lower estimates. This happened even when people knew the number was random. The anchor worked because the brain uses it as a reference point. Even if we know it's unrelated, we still adjust from it instead of starting from scratch. This process is called anchoring and adjustment. The problem is that the adjustment is often too small. We stay close to the anchor. Anchoring bias appears in many real-world situations. A common example is in price negotiation. If a seller starts with a high asking price, the buyer's counteroffer tends to be higher than if the seller had started with a low price. The initial number sets the tone. Even if the buyer thinks they're offering a fair price, they are often anchoring off the seller's number without realizing it. Retailers also use anchors when setting prices. If a product is marked as originally $100, now $60, the $100 becomes the anchor. It makes the $60 price seem like a bargain, even if the true value of the item is much lower. The discount looks better because the comparison point is high. Without that anchor, the $60 might feel expensive. Anchoring can also affect salary discussions. If a candidate names a high number early in a job interview, the employer's offer may shift upward. If the employer gives a low starting number, the candidate may lower their expectations. The first figure mentioned sets the frame for the rest of the conversation. The same effect shows up in everyday guesses. If someone asks, "Is the height of the Eiffel Tower more or less than 1,000 feet?" your estimate will be higher than if they asked, "Is it more or less than 200 feet?" Even though you know the question is designed to influence you, your guess will still lean toward the anchor. This happens because the brain likes shortcuts. Estimating an unknown number takes effort. Anchoring provides a quick starting point. From there, we try to adjust up or down, but we rarely adjust far enough. The anchor sticks. This can lead to poor judgments in settings where accuracy matters. In courtrooms, anchors can affect jury decisions. When lawyers suggest high or low amounts for damages, those numbers influence the final award, even if they're extreme. Jurors often start with the suggested figure and adjust from there, rather than forming an estimate based only on the facts. Studies show that higher requests tend to produce higher payouts. Anchoring can even affect self-perception. If a student is told that the average score on a test is high, they may rate their performance lower, even if they did well. If they hear the average was low, they may feel more confident. The anchor shifts how they see their own result. The number frames their interpretation. The bias can show up in news and statistics. If someone reads that inflation rose by 8% last year, they may overreact to smaller changes this year, using the 8% as an anchor. If they read that a town had 500 thefts in a year, they may expect high crime rates, even if the number drops the next year. That initial figure shapes how later data feels. One reason anchoring is hard to avoid is that it often happens without awareness. People do not realize they are being influenced. Even when warned about the bias, the effect often remains. In some studies, researchers told participants that the anchor was random or incorrect. The participants still gave estimates close to the anchor. Anchoring also affects planning. When teams estimate how long a project will take, the first guess tends to guide the final timeline. If someone says it might take 2 months, others adjust from that figure instead of starting from the task details. This can lead to underestimating or overestimating, especially if the first number was just a guess. Real estate agents are also influenced by anchors. In one study, professionals visited a house and then estimated its value. They were given a listing price that was either high or low. Even though they said the listing price didn't affect their judgment, their estimates moved in the same direction as the anchor. The more they saw the house as worth the listing price, the more their appraisal reflected it. Anchoring bias is not limited to numbers. It can affect how we form opinions. If someone first hears that a person is very kind, they may rate that person's actions more favorably. If the first word they hear is selfish, they may focus on flaws. The initial impression becomes the anchor, and later information is interpreted in its light. People also anchor on past experiences. If someone paid $30 for a meal that was just okay, they may use that price as a standard. Later, if they see a better meal for $35, they might think it's overpriced. The previous $30 becomes the anchor, even if the second meal is worth more. One way to reduce anchoring bias is to avoid focusing on the first number you hear. Instead, think about what the number represents. Break the problem into parts and use outside data when possible. For example, when buying a car, research the market price before negotiating. When estimating a task, consider past timelines for similar work. Another strategy is to delay making a judgment. The longer you wait before committing to a number, the more likely you are to look at the full picture. If you can recognize the anchor, you may adjust more effectively. Tversky and Kahneman's work on angering bias showed that even irrelevant numbers can shape our thinking. The effect is strong, consistent, and hard to ignore. It reveals a key feature of human judgment. We are not always rational calculators. We are influenced by context, by the order in which we see things, and by the numbers that come first. Even when we try to be careful, the anchor pulls us in. In 1960, psychologist Peter Wason ran a study to understand how people test ideas. He gave participants a simple task: figure out the rule behind a sequence of numbers. The example was 2, 4, 6. People had to guess the rule and test it by giving new sequences. Wason would say whether the new sequence followed the rule. Most people guessed that the rule was add 2. They tested this by offering similar sequences like 8, 10, 12, or 20, 22, 24. Wason confirmed those examples, so people felt sure they were right. But they rarely tested sequences that might disprove their idea, like 2, 3, 4, or 10, 11, 12. If they had, they would have learned that the actual rule was much broader: any ascending numbers. Their guesses were not wrong, but their testing was limited. They only looked for patterns that confirmed what they already believed. This tendency became known as confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the habit of looking for, noticing, and remembering information that supports what we already think. At the same time, we tend to ignore or downplay information that goes against our views. This can happen without our awareness. We feel like we're being fair, but we're leaning toward ideas that match our beliefs. It's a shortcut the brain uses to make sense of the world quickly. But it can lead to poor judgment, especially when we avoid facts that challenge our thinking. This bias affects how we search for information. If someone believes a health supplement helps them sleep, they may go online and search, "Does this supplement improve sleep?" They will find articles that say yes, but they probably won't search, "Does this supplement have no effect on sleep?" The first search invites support. The second invites doubt. Most people prefer the first. They're not trying to lie to themselves, but they want to feel sure. So they look for proof, not tests. It also shows up in how we interpret data. Two people may read the same news story and come to opposite conclusions. If one supports a new policy and the other opposes it, each will focus on parts that match their view. One might say, "This shows the plan is working," while the other says, "This proves it's a mistake." Both are reacting to the same facts, but their beliefs guide what they see in the story. Memory plays a role as well. People tend to recall facts that support their views more clearly than facts that don't. If someone believes a certain diet works, they may remember the one friend who lost weight on it, but forget the others who didn't. If someone thinks a politician is honest, they may recall past examples of honesty, but forget moments of dishonesty. The mind holds on to what fits and lets go of what doesn't. Confirmation bias can affect decisions at all levels. In business, a team might become convinced that a new product will succeed. They highlight the test results that support the plan and ignore weak signals from early markets that suggest problems. They may push ahead, feeling confident, only to be surprised when sales fall short. They were looking for signs of success, not for signs of failure. In science, researchers are trained to test against their ideas. But even then, confirmation bias can slip in. A scientist might run an experiment and focus on data that supports the hypothesis, while dismissing results that don't match expectations. Good research tries to avoid this by using blind methods and peer review. But the bias can still affect how results are chosen, explained, or published. In personal life, the bias shapes relationships. If you believe a friend is loyal, you may excuse signs that they're not. If you think a coworker is lazy, you may notice every time they take a break, but ignore when they stay late. Once an idea is fixed in your mind, your attention shifts to keep that idea in place. Social media makes confirmation bias stronger. Many platforms show you content, based on what you've liked or followed. Over time, this builds an echo chamber. You see the same views repeated. You feel like those views are common and obvious. You rarely see or engage with opposing views in a serious way. This makes your beliefs feel even more correct and opposing views feel more extreme or wrong. The gap between groups grows, not because of facts, but because of how people filter them. In political debate, confirmation bias helps people hold on to views even when the facts shift. If someone supports a policy, they may accept weak evidence in favor of it and demand strong evidence against it. If someone opposes it, they may do the reverse. This means that the same new information can push people further apart rather than bring them closer together. One way to fight confirmation bias is to ask, what would prove me wrong? This question turns your focus toward disconfirming evidence. If you believe a new habit improves your mood, track the days when it doesn't. If you think a theory makes sense, look for examples that it fails to explain. This kind of thinking takes effort. It feels slower and less comfortable, but it leads to stronger conclusions. Another method is to seek out opposing views. This doesn't mean treating all views as equal, but it means listening to the strongest version of the other side. Ask, what's their best argument, not just what's wrong with what they think. You may still disagree, but you'll understand the topic more deeply. Being aware of confirmation bias does not remove it. It still works in the background, but noticing it can slow it down. You can remind yourself to check both sides before deciding. You can ask others to point out when you're only seeing one angle. You can build habits of asking, is there another way to look at this? In Wayson's study, the participants weren't foolish. They used a common way of testing an idea. Try examples that match the pattern, but this method hides the full picture. Real understanding often comes from testing the edge cases, the examples that don't fit. When we look only for support, we see only what we want to see. Confirmation bias is part of how the human brain works. It helps us make quick decisions and feel confident, but it also narrows our thinking. It keeps us from updating our views when new facts appear. It makes us overconfident in what we think we know. And it turns disagreement into misunderstanding because we only hear half the story. Recognizing this bias lets us ask better questions, make better choices, and stay open to learning, even when the answers surprise us. In 2011, behavioral economist Dan Ariely and his colleagues studied how people value the things they make. They found that when people build or assemble something themselves, they tend to like it more, even if the result is not especially good. This effect became known as the IKEA Effect, named after the popular furniture store where customers buy products they must assemble at home. The study showed that effort increases attachment. People place higher value on what they help create, regardless of its quality. In one experiment, participants were given materials to build a simple origami figure, such as a crane or frog. After completing their figure, they were asked how much they would pay for it. Other participants, who didn't build anything, were shown the same figures and asked how much they would pay. The builders valued their own creations much more than the observers did. They believed the figures were worth more, even though many of them looked clumsy or uneven. Builders saw value because they had put in work. The effect is not limited to origami or furniture. It appears in many situations where people invest effort. If someone bakes a cake from a mix, even if it's just adding eggs and water, they may believe it tastes better than the same cake made by someone else. If someone paints a room or builds a small table, they often feel proud of the result. They see flaws, but those flaws don't reduce the value. In some cases, the flaws make the item feel more personal. This attachment to self-made products comes from a sense of ownership and identity. When we build something, we see part of ourselves in it. The object is no longer just a thing. It becomes a reflection of our time, focus, and decisions. Even small tasks, like screwing in a few bolts or folding paper. Create a link between the object and the self. That link changes how we judge its worth. Companies sometimes use the IKEA effect to increase customer satisfaction. Build your own products, make people feel more involved. Meal kits that let customers prepare food at home often lead to higher satisfaction than pre-cooked meals, even when the taste is the same. Customers enjoy the act of preparing the food, and that effort raises the perceived value. In software, tools that allow users to customize or personalize a product, such as building a playlist, designing a logo, or setting up a profile, can increase engagement and loyalty. The effect also appears in group projects. When people work on a shared task, they often value the result more than outside observers do. This can lead to disagreements about quality. A team that spends weeks on a report or design may believe it is excellent because of the effort involved, but someone reviewing it for the first time may see flaws or weaknesses the team missed. The creators, focused on their own contribution, may be less open to criticism. This can cause problems in decision-making. People may hold on to ideas, products, or processes, not because they are the best, but because they built them. If a manager designs a new workflow, they may resist changing it, even if the team struggles to use it, because they feel ownership. If a teacher creates a lesson plan, they may overvalue its impact because they wrote it themselves. The work feels valuable because of the effort it required, not just because of the outcome. The IKEA effect can also shape how we feel about hobbies and personal projects. A person who builds their own bicycle may prefer it to a better-performing store-bought version. A gardener who grows vegetables may believe their produce tastes better than what they buy at the market. Even if others disagree, the person sees their work as meaningful. The value comes not just from the object, but from the process of making it. In some cases, the IKEA effect can lead to overconfidence. When people create something, they may ignore signs that it isn't working. A business owner who builds a website may think it's easy to use, while customers struggle to navigate it. A new parent who assembles a toy may believe it is well made, even if it wobbles or breaks. The effort put into the task blinds the person to faults in the final result. The effect is stronger when the project is completed. If people are forced to stop before finishing, they value the work less. Completion matters. In one version of the origami study, participants who built a figure but weren't allowed to finish it gave it a lower value. The sense of ownership did not form fully. The act of finishing the task plays a key role in shaping the connection between person and product. The IKEA effect also interacts with self-image. When people build something, they feel competent. The task may be simple, but finishing it provides a small sense of achievement. That feeling feeds into how they view themselves. The object becomes more than a tool or decoration. It becomes proof of their ability. This is why some people resist help during projects. If someone else builds it for them, they miss the sense of achievement. The final result may be perfect, but it won't feel like theirs. The effect works even when the task is guided. People don't need to create from scratch. They only need to contribute. That's why flat-pack furniture works so well. The instructions are clear. The parts are labeled, but the customer still feels that they built something. That effort, even if limited, changes the way the furniture is viewed. It becomes more than a table. It becomes my table. In education, the IKEA effect can help students engage with learning. When students create a project, build a model, or write a report, they often feel more connected to the material. They may remember the content better and feel more proud of their work. But it can also make them resistant to feedback. If a teacher points out errors, the student may take it personally. They see the project as part of themselves. Understanding the IKEA effect can help people make better decisions. It reminds us that effort can cloud judgment. Just because we worked hard on something doesn't mean it's the best choice. When reviewing work, our own or others, it helps to ask, am I judging the result or just my effort? Stepping back and getting outside opinions can balance this bias. At the same time, the effect has positive uses. It helps people feel more satisfied with their work. It builds motivation. It encourages learning by doing. Knowing that effort increases value, designers, teachers, and leaders can build systems that invite participation. When people take part in creation, they care more about the result. The process becomes personal. The product becomes meaningful. The outcome may not be perfect, but to the builder, it's worth more than anything bought off the shelf. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a study at Yale University to test how far people would go when told to follow orders, even if it meant harming someone else. He wanted to understand obedience, especially in the context of events like those in World War II, where many claimed they were just following orders. What he found shocked both the public and the scientific community. Ordinary people with no special training or aggressive traits were willing to deliver what they believed were painful and even deadly electric shocks to another person when instructed by an authority figure. The setup was simple, but carefully designed. Participants were told they were taking part in a study about learning and memory. They were introduced to another person, who they believed was another participant. In reality, this person was an actor working with the researchers. The participant drew lots to decide who would be the teacher and who would be the learner, but the draw was rigged so that the real participant always became the teacher. The learner was strapped into a chair in a separate room and hooked up to a fake shock machine. The teacher sat in front of a panel with switches labeled with increasing voltages from 15 to 450 volts. Each switch was also labeled with a description, starting with slight shock and ending with XXX, suggesting extreme danger. The teacher's job was to read out word pairs and then test the learner's ability to recall them. Every time the learner got an answer wrong, the teacher was instructed to deliver a shock, increasing the voltage each time. Unknown to the teacher, no real shocks were given. The learner's reactions were scripted. At first, the learner gave mild protests. As the voltage increased, the learner began to cry out in pain, demand to be released, and eventually go silent. Despite these clear signs of distress, many participants continued to press the switches. If they hesitated, the experimenter, dressed in a lab coat, gave simple verbal prompts such as "please continue," "the experiment requires that you continue," or "you have no other choice, you must go on." Milgram expected that only a few people would go all the way to the highest voltage. He predicted that most would stop when the learner showed signs of serious discomfort. But the results told a different story. About 2/3 of the participants went all the way to 450 volts. Many showed signs of stress, sweating, trembling, biting their lips, but they still obeyed the instructions. They believed they were hurting someone, but they kept going because the authority figure told them to. The study revealed how powerful authority can be. When someone in a position of perceived power tells us to do something, we often comply, even when it goes against our own moral judgment. The participants were not evil or cruel. They were everyday people who found themselves in a controlled situation where they deferred to the authority of the experimenter. They assumed the person in charge knew what was right. They felt responsible for doing their job, not for the consequences of their actions. Milgram ran variations of the study to see what changed people's behavior. When the learner was in the same room as the teacher, obedience dropped. When the teacher had to physically force the learner's hand onto a shock plate, obedience dropped further. But even then, a significant number of people still went along with the instructions. When other participants, actually actors, refused to obey, the real participant was also more likely to stop. But when the actors continued, the real participant usually did too. Social influence mattered. Seeing others obey made people more likely to do the same. The study raised many ethical questions. Participants were visibly distressed. Some thought they had harmed someone. Even though they were debriefed afterward and told the shocks were fake, critics said the emotional stress was too high. Today, the same experiment would not be approved under modern research standards. Still, the core lesson remains important. People will follow orders even when it conflicts with their own values, especially when authority and structure are in place. The findings also apply outside the lab. In the military, people are trained to follow commands. In business, employees may follow unethical orders to keep their jobs. In hospitals, junior staff may not question doctors even when they see mistakes. The Milgram study shows that people often shift responsibility to the person giving the orders. They tell themselves, "I'm just doing what I was told." That mindset can lead to serious harm when no one stops to question the command. Obedience can be useful. Society needs some order and structure to function. People follow rules, laws, and instructions to keep things running. But blind obedience, where people stop thinking for themselves, can be dangerous. Milgram's work reminds us that authority should not go unchecked. Just because someone is in charge doesn't mean they are right. And just because we are told to do something doesn't mean we should. The stress participants felt in the study showed that they knew something was wrong. They weren't comfortable hurting the learner. They asked if the shocks were dangerous. They wanted to stop. But the calm, firm voice of the experimenter kept them going. That gap between what people believe and what they do under pressure is at the heart of the study. It shows how situational forces, not personal traits, often guide behavior. Milgram's study changed how psychologists understand behavior. Before his work, many believed that acts of cruelty or wrongdoing came from flawed individuals. His research suggested a different view. Ordinary people, under certain conditions, could commit harmful acts simply because they were told to. That doesn't mean people are bad. It means behavior depends on context, on who is in charge, what the setting is, and what pressures exist. The study also showed the importance of questioning authority. When people ask why they are doing something, when they take time to reflect, they are less likely to follow harmful orders. When they feel free to speak up or walk away, obedience drops. Encouraging critical thinking, open discussion, and personal responsibility can protect against the darker side of obedience. In follow-up interviews, some participants said they were glad they took part. The study had pushed them to think deeply about authority and morality. Others felt guilt or discomfort, even after learning the shocks were fake. Their reactions reflect how strong the experience was. It wasn't just a task. It was a moral test, one many never expected to face. A Milgram obedience study remains one of the most well-known experiments in psychology. It's often taught in classrooms, cited in discussions of power, and referenced in debates about ethics. Its message is simple, but hard to ignore. Under the right conditions, good people can do things they never thought possible, not because they want to, but because someone told them to. Understanding that fact is the first step toward making better choices when pressure rises. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo ran an experiment at Stanford University to study how people behave in prison-like environments. He wanted to understand whether people act the way they do in prisons because of their personalities or because of the roles they are given. To test this, he created a simulated prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Building. He recruited 24 healthy male college students and randomly assigned them to play the role of either a guard or a prisoner. The setup was detailed. Zimbardo worked with local police to make the arrests feel real. The students assigned to be prisoners were arrested at their homes, handcuffed, and taken to the prison. They were booked, fingerprinted, blindfolded, and brought into the mock jail. They wore smocks, numbers instead of names, and stocking caps to simulate shaved heads. The guards wore uniforms, reflective sunglasses to block eye contact, and carried whistles and batons. They were told to keep order, but not told exactly how to do it. Zimbardo acted as the prison superintendent. At the start, both groups acted awkwardly. The guards were unsure how strict to be. The prisoners tried to follow the rules. But within a short time, things changed. Some guards began to assert power. They gave out orders, made prisoners do push-ups, and started using punishments for small rule breaking. They controlled when prisoners could eat, sleep, or go to the bathroom. Some guards became more aggressive as the days went on, inventing ways to humiliate the prisoners, such as forcing them to repeat their numbers or clean toilets with their hands. The prisoners reacted in different ways. Some obeyed quietly, others protested. One prisoner had a breakdown and had to leave early. Another went on a hunger strike. The guards responded with harsher rules, like taking away mattresses or isolating prisoners in a closet. Even the other prisoners began to turn against the ones who rebelled. A few prisoners showed signs of stress, crying, shaking, or refusing to eat. Despite the harsh conditions, many felt they could not leave. Zimbardo had planned to run the experiment for 2 weeks, but it was stopped after 6 days. A visiting researcher, Christina Maslach, came to observe the prison and was disturbed by what she saw. She questioned why no one was doing anything about the cruelty. Her reaction made Zimbardo realize how far the experiment had gone. He ended it the next day. The Stanford prison experiment showed how quickly people can adopt roles and how those roles can shape behavior. The students knew they were in a study. They knew it was not real, but they acted as if it was. The guards were not told to be cruel, but many of them became abusive. The prisoners were not truly powerless, but they felt like they were. The setting and the roles made the behavior seem natural. The line between play acting and real harm became blurred. Zimbardo used the results to argue that the situation, not the person, often drives behavior. In his view, it wasn't that the guards were bad people. It was that the prison environment gave them power, stripped away personal identity, and allowed cruelty to grow. He called this process de-individuation, when people lose their sense of self and take on the identity of their role. In this state, normal rules and morals seem to fade. The experiment became famous and is still widely taught. It seemed to show that under the right conditions, ordinary people could do harm without needing to be told. It supported other research, like Milgram's obedience study, that suggested behavior often follows the situation rather than personal traits. It was cited in discussions about real prisons, including abuses at military facilities, and in debates about the power of authority and the risks of unchecked systems. But over time, critics raised serious concerns. Some said the study was more a demonstration than an experiment. There were no control groups. The sample size was small. The instructions given to guards were vague, but may have hinted at what kind of behavior was expected. Some later reports showed that Zimbardo and his staff encouraged certain outcomes to make the study more dramatic. The line between observation and manipulation was unclear. Others pointed out that the participants may have been acting. They knew they were in a study, and some may have believed they were supposed to act like real guards or real prisoners. One guard, in later interviews, said he copied behavior he had seen in a movie. Some prisoners said they stayed because they felt trapped by the situation, not because they believed they had no choice. This raises questions about whether the behavior was spontaneous or shaped by the expectations of the study. Ethical concerns also grew. the participants showed signs of real stress. Some guards behaved in ways they later regretted. The prisoners were not protected from emotional harm. At the time, research standards were less strict. But by today's rules, the experiment would not be allowed. Informed consent did not fully explain what participants might face. The study lacked safeguards to stop harm early. Zimbardo defended the study by saying it revealed important truths. He said it showed how quickly systems can break down and how power can lead to abuse. But many psychologists now use the experiment more as a cautionary tale than as proof. They point out that strong claims should rest on stronger evidence. Still, the experiment raised questions that remain relevant. In real prisons, guards and inmates face similar forces. The system gives one side power and limits the rights of the other. If rules are loose and oversight is weak, cruelty can grow. The same risks appear in other places, like schools, hospitals, or workplaces, where roles, uniforms, and expectations of their obedience can grow. And chains of command can push people toward behavior they might never show on their own. The experiment also sparked new research. Other psychologists tested similar ideas with stricter methods. Some found that people do not always conform to roles unless they believe in them. Others found that people are more likely to resist when they see unfair treatment. These studies suggest that while the situation matters, so do personal values, group identity, and leadership. The truth may be more complex than Zimbardo first claimed. Even with its flaws, the Stanford prison experiment remains a powerful example of how context can shape human behavior. It shows that people adapt to their surroundings and that roles come with expectations that influence how people act. It shows how power, even in a game, can be taken too far. And it shows that systems, once set in motion, can create conditions where harm feels justified, even when it is not. In 1968, psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané studied how people respond to emergencies. They were interested in a tragic event that had happened 4 years earlier, the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Reports at the time claimed that dozens of people had heard her cries for help, but that no one had acted. The story shocked the public and raised questions about human behavior in groups. Darley and Latané wanted to find out why people often fail to help when others are around. They designed experiments to test what is now called the Bystander Effect. The Bystander Effect refers to the finding that people are less likely to help in an emergency when other people are present. The more people there are, the less each person feels responsible for taking action. This is known as diffusion of responsibility. Each person assumes that someone else will step in. As a result, no one does. In one of their studies, Darley and Latané recruited college students to take part in what they believed was a discussion about college life. Each participant was placed in a separate room and told they would speak with others through an intercom. In reality, the other voices were pre-recorded. During the session, one of the voices, pretending to be another student, said they were having a seizure and asked for help. The researchers changed one detail across groups: the number of people the participant thought were also listening. Some participants believed they were the only other person on the call. Others thought there were 2, 4, or more listeners. The results were clear. When participants thought they were the only person present, most acted quickly. They tried to get help or alert the researchers. But when they believed others were also listening, their response time dropped. In some cases, they did nothing at all. The more people they thought were involved, the less likely they were to help. This pattern held across different versions of the experiment. The presence of others reduced the sense of personal duty. People felt that someone else would handle it or already had. They waited to see what others would do. This waiting created a silent loop. Everyone assumed others would act, so no one acted. The effect doesn't come from cruelty or indifference. Most people want to help, but in group situations, they second-guess themselves. They look to others for cues on what to do. If no one else is moving, they assume the situation isn't urgent or that someone more qualified will step in. This is called pluralistic ignorance. Everyone looks calm, so everyone thinks help isn't needed. Real-world examples of the bystander effect are common. A person collapses on a busy sidewalk. Dozens walk past. Each person may think, surely someone else already called for help. A fire alarm goes off in an office. People look around. No one leaves. Each person waits to see what others do, assuming someone else knows more. In emergencies, quick action can make the difference between life and death. The bystander effect slows that action. It can stop it altogether. This is why training helps. When people learn about the bystander effect, they're more likely to act. They understand that waiting for someone else is the problem. They recognize the signs of hesitation and move past them. In some cities, public awareness campaigns teach people to be the one who helps. Emergency response training often includes tips like pointing directly to someone. You, in the blue shirt, call 911, instead of yelling to a crowd. This removes the confusion and gives one person clear responsibility. The bystander effect also shows up in workplaces and schools. A coworker may make an offensive comment during a meeting. Several people hear it, but no one speaks up. Each person hopes someone else will. A student sees bullying in a hallway. Others watch too. No one moves. Later, many say they felt bad but didn't know what to do. The group made it harder to act, not easier. Even online, the effect appears. Someone posts a cry for help on social media. Many see it. Some may assume others will reach out. A few may like or share the post but take no direct action. The larger the audience, the more likely it is that no one steps forward. The key factor is the number of people. When we are alone, we know that responsibility rests with us. When others are around, that feeling weakens. It's not that people don't care. It's that the presence of others changes how we think and feel about the situation. Darley and Latney's work challenged the idea that behavior in emergencies comes only from personal traits, like courage or kindness. Their studies showed that context matters. Good people may fail to act if the setting makes it unclear what they should do. The social situation shapes the response as much as personality does. Other studies have supported their findings. In one, people walked into a room that slowly filled with smoke. If alone, they usually left quickly or reported the problem. But if others were present and stayed calm, the person often did the same, even when the smoke became heavy. Again, the group shaped behavior. People followed the lead of others, even if it meant ignoring clear signs of danger. The bystander effect doesn't mean people never help in groups. Help does happen, especially when someone takes the first step. That act breaks the silence and gives others permission to join. Often, once one person speaks or moves, others quickly follow. The first response is the hardest. It cuts through uncertainty and sets a clear example. Some people are more likely to break the pattern. Those with training, strong moral conviction, or a personal connection to the issue often step in faster. But anyone can do it. Awareness is the first tool. Once people know about the bystander effect, they're more likely to push through it. Darley and Latney changed how psychologists think about emergencies. They showed that helping isn't just about caring. It's also about clarity. When people know what's happening and what they can do, they're more likely to act. But when signals are unclear and others seem passive, even caring people stay still. Their work continues to shape training for first responders, teachers, security staff, and the general public. It reminds us that in a group, silence doesn't mean safety, and that taking the first step, even a small one, can shift the whole group toward action. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran a series of studies that showed how people can conform to group pressure, even when the group is clearly wrong. His goal was to explore how social influence shapes behavior. He wanted to know if people would stick to their own judgment when everyone around them gave the wrong answer. What he found surprised many. People often went along with the group, even when they could see the truth for themselves. The experiment was simple. Participants sat at a table and looked at a card with a line on it. Then they saw a second card with 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. One of those lines matched the length of the line on the first card. The task was to say which line, A, B, or C, was the correct match. The right answer was always obvious. This was not a trick or an illusion. Most people, working alone, got it right every time. But Asch added a twist. Each participant was placed in a group with several other people. These others were actually actors, working with the experimenter. The real participant didn't know this. Everyone took turns saying their answer out loud. The real participant always went last, or near the end. At first, the actors gave the correct answer, but then they began to give the same wrong answer, one that was clearly incorrect. The question was, what would the real participant do? In about 1/3 of the trials, the real participant went along with the group and gave the wrong answer. Across all participants, about 75% conformed at least once. A smaller number resisted completely, giving their true answer every time. But the majority gave in at some point, even when their eyes told them the group was wrong. Asch wanted to know why. After the experiment, he asked participants how they felt. Many said they knew the group was wrong, but didn't want to stand out. They didn't want to seem different or cause conflict. Some said they began to doubt their own judgment. If everyone else gave the same answer, maybe they were missing something. A few said they truly believed the group's answer was correct. These responses show 2 different reasons for conformity. One is normative influence, the pressure to fit in. People want to be accepted by others, so they go along with the group even if they disagree privately. The other is informational influence, the idea that others might know something you don't. When faced with a unanimous group, people sometimes assume the group is right and they are wrong. Asch ran variations of the study to see what changed behavior. When even one other person in the group gave the correct answer, conformity dropped sharply. The presence of a single ally gave participants confidence to speak their mind. When the group size was smaller, conformity also dropped. It was strongest with about 3 to 5 people giving the same wrong answer. Larger groups didn't increase the effect much more. He also tested what happened when participants wrote their answers instead of saying them out loud. In those cases, conformity dropped. The pressure to conform weakened without the group watching. This showed that the effect was tied to social pressure more than belief in the wrong answer. The Asch experiments helped explain why people sometimes follow the crowd, even when the crowd is clearly mistaken. It showed that social pressure can override what we see with our own eyes. The effect doesn't come from weakness or a lack of intelligence. It comes from the way we are wired to seek social harmony and avoid standing alone. The findings apply to many areas of life. In classrooms, students may stay quiet when others give the wrong answer. In meetings, employees may agree with a plan they doubt, just because everyone else does. In juries, members may vote with the majority even if they're unsure, especially when the group seems confident. The pressure to conform can shape decisions at all levels, from personal choices to public policies. The effect also appears in fashion, politics, and online behavior. People may change how they speak, dress, or vote to match those around them. On social media, likes and comments create visible group opinions. Users may hold back their views or change them to align with the majority. Even when alone with a screen, the sense of group opinion can shape what people say and do. At the same time, not everyone conforms. Some people are more likely to resist pressure. Factors like confidence, experience, or support from others can make a difference. People who feel secure in their identity or who value truth over acceptance may be less likely to go along with the group. Still, The Asch studies show that anyone can be influenced in the right setting. The effect is not limited to a specific type of person. Asch's work also sparked interest in how groups shape behavior. Later studies looked at groupthink, when groups make poor decisions because members suppress doubt to maintain unity. In those cases, the desire to agree becomes stronger than the desire to think critically. History offers many examples where group pressure led to major errors, from business failures to political disasters. One lesson from Asch's research is the power of dissent. When just one person speaks up, it can break the silence and give others permission to do the same. That voice doesn't have to be loud or forceful. It only needs to show that conformity is not the only path. In the experiments, the presence of a single dissenter reduced conformity by about 80%. The effect was strong, even when the dissenter also gave a wrong answer, as long as it was a different wrong answer. What mattered was that the group was no longer unanimous. Asch believed that independence of mind was vital for healthy societies. He saw the risk in going along with the group without question. He was especially concerned about the social forces that had allowed harmful ideologies to spread during the 20th century. His work was not just about lines on a card. It was about the human tendency to yield to group opinion and the cost of silence. His experiments continue to influence psychology today. They are often taught in classes on social behavior. They remind us that seeing is not always believing when group pressure enters the picture. And they show that standing apart, even once, can change how others think and act. In everyday life, conformity is not always harmful. It helps people live together, follow rules, and create shared meaning. But when conformity overrides truth or conscience, it becomes a problem. Asch's work offers a way to understand when that happens and what we can do to resist it. Even in a group, we still have the power to choose our own path. Sometimes, one voice is all it takes to shift the room. In 1954, psychologist Muzafer Sherif and his colleagues ran a study in Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. They wanted to understand what causes conflict between groups and how to reduce it. The study involved 22 boys, aged 11 and 12, all from similar backgrounds. They were white, Protestant, middle-class boys who did not know each other before the study. The researchers wanted to focus on group behavior, not personal differences. They divided the boys into two groups and kept them separate for the first part of the study. In the beginning, each group thought it was alone at the camp. They spent time doing activities like hiking, swimming, and building campfires. They formed group names, the Eagles and the Rattlers, and developed their own rules, leaders, and identities. They made flags and shirts. They saw themselves as a team. The group bonds formed quickly. The boys started to feel proud of their group and loyal to its members. Then the researchers revealed that another group was at the camp. They arranged a series of competitions between the Eagles and the Rattlers. The events included tug-of-war, baseball, and treasure hunts. The winners earned prizes like medals and knives. The losing team got nothing. As the contests continued, tension between the groups grew. The boys began insulting each other, stealing items, and even raiding each other's cabins. Hostility escalated. Fights broke out. They burned each other's flags and refused to eat in the same dining hall. The researchers had created a situation where conflict grew from competition. The boys were not aggressive by nature, but the setup encouraged rivalry. The teams were competing for limited rewards, and that pressure led to division. This stage showed how easily in-group and out-group thinking can take hold. People start to favor their own group and treat outsiders with suspicion or hostility. Sherif then moved to the next phase. He wanted to see if the conflict could be reduced. At first, the researchers tried simple activities to bring the groups together, like watching movies or eating meals side by side. These efforts failed. The boys kept to themselves. They threw food and refused to speak to the other group. Just putting people in the same place was not enough to fix the damage. Being near each other did not build trust. In fact, it gave more chances to argue or avoid each other. The researchers then introduced superordinate goals, tasks that required both groups to work together to succeed. One task involved fixing a water tank that supplied the camp. The researchers made it seem like the water supply had broken. The boys were told that unless they worked together, they would run out of water. Both groups helped carry equipment and repair the pipe. Another task involved pushing a broken-down truck. The truck would not move unless all the boys worked together. These shared problems forced cooperation. The groups needed each other. As the boys completed more shared tasks, the tension began to fade. They stopped name-calling. They started eating together. They asked to ride the same bus home. The superordinate goals gave them a reason to see each other as teammates, not enemies. The groups still had their identities, but the boundaries softened. They now saw value in the other group. Working together had changed how they viewed each other. Sharif used this study to show that group conflict is not just about personality or prejudice. It often comes from competition over limited resources. When people think they need to beat another group to win something, conflict is more likely. But when people must cooperate to reach a goal, even hostile groups can build peace. This theory became known as realistic conflict theory. The Robbers Cave study also showed that contact alone is not enough to reduce conflict. People can sit next to each other and still dislike each other. Real change happens when they work toward a shared purpose. The key is structured cooperation, clear goals that require joint effort, equal status, and mutual benefit. Without that, the groups stay divided. The study has lessons for many parts of society. In schools, rival groups of students may fight over attention, resources, or social status. Team projects that require shared effort can help build bridges. In workplaces, departments may compete for funding or praise. Leaders can reduce friction by creating tasks that need cross-team cooperation. In communities, conflict may come from perceived threats to jobs or safety. Shared goals, like improving local parks, schools, or safety, can bring people together. Even on the global stage, countries often act like the eagles and the rattlers. They compete for power, trade, or influence. But international efforts to fight climate change, disease, or poverty show that shared problems can shift the focus. When nations must work together, the us versus them mindset weakens. Trust grows not through speeches, but through action. The study also shows how quickly group identities form. The boys bonded with strangers in just a few days. They were proud to belong. They wore their group names and defended each other. This reflects a deep human need to belong. Once a group forms, it shapes how people think, feel, and act. Group loyalty can build teamwork, but it can also lead to exclusion or aggression toward outsiders. Sharif's work faced some limits. The study used a small, narrow group of boys. The setting was controlled, and the researchers had influence over what happened. But even with those limits, the study revealed basic patterns in group behavior. It showed how social structures and goals shape conflict more than personal traits. The experiment also raised ethical questions. The boys did not know they were part of a study on conflict. They believed the situations were real. Some experienced stress, fear, or rejection. Today, research ethics would require more protection, but the study remains one of the clearest examples of how group dynamics lead to conflict and how they can be repaired. The Robbers Cave experiment showed that people are not fixed in their views of others. Under the right conditions, enemies can become allies. Rivalry can turn into respect. But change takes more than words. It takes cooperation, shared risk, and common ground. People must work together towards something that matters to all sides. When they do, the walls between groups can begin to fall. In 1974, psychologists Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron ran a study in British Columbia to explore how people experience attraction. They were interested in how physical arousal, like a racing heart or shaky hands, can affect how people judge their feelings. Their idea was that people don't always know why they feel the way they do. Instead, they look at their situation and make a guess. Sometimes, that guess is wrong. This process is called misattribution of arousal. To test this, the researchers used two bridges. One was a narrow, wobbly suspension bridge high above a river. It swayed in the wind and had low handrails. Crossing it could make people feel nervous or even afraid. The second bridge was solid, low to the ground, and wide. It felt safe and steady. The researchers placed a female experimenter on each bridge. As men crossed, she stopped them and asked them to take part in a survey. After they finished, she handed them her phone number and said they could call her if they had any questions about the study. The researchers then watched to see who called. The men who met the woman on the shaky bridge were more likely to call her afterward. They also wrote more sexual or romantic content in their answers to a prompt during the survey. The men who met her on the stable bridge were less likely to call and less likely to write about attraction. The key difference was not the woman or what she said, it was the physical state of the men. Those on the shaky bridge felt their hearts pound and their hands shake. They were breathing harder and felt alert. But instead of thinking, "I'm scared," many of them thought, "I'm attracted to her." Their bodies were telling them they were aroused, and their minds looked for a reason. The woman standing in front of them seemed like a good one. This experiment showed how people can mix up the source of their emotions. The body reacts, and the brain tries to explain it. But the explanation depends on the context. If you meet someone while your body is already worked up, you might think your feelings are about the person, not the situation. In this case, fear increased attraction because the participants did not realize the fear was due to the bridge. The researchers tested a few other variations. In one, a male experimenter gave the same survey and phone number to men on both bridges. Few called him, no matter the setting. In another version, the woman waited 10 minutes before approaching. By that time, the men's bodies had calmed down. The delay weakened the effect. Fewer men called her, and their answers were less suggestive. This showed that the arousal had to be happening at the same time as the meeting for the misattribution to occur. This idea fits into a broader theory of emotion called the two-factor theory. According to this theory, first you feel a change in your body, like a faster heartbeat or tense muscles. Then you figure out what emotion you're feeling by looking at your environment. Your brain asks, "What's causing this?" and picks the explanation that makes the most sense at the time. If you're on a scary bridge and see someone attractive, your brain might connect the dots in the wrong way. The bridge study is one of the clearest examples of this. It shows that feelings of attraction are not just about who you're with. They also depend on what's going on in your body and around you. In daily life, this helps explain why people may feel strong connections in exciting or tense situations. For example, people might fall for each other more easily during a thrilling event like a concert, a sports game, or even a crisis, because their bodies are already in a heightened state. This can also apply to arguments. If someone feels tense or stressed and meets another person during that time, they might feel stronger reactions, positive or negative, than they would if they were calm. The situation shapes the emotion, even if the person doesn't notice it. In marketing and entertainment, creators often use this effect without calling it by name. Romantic scenes in films often take place during high-stakes moments. Storms, car chases, or just after danger has passed. These settings increase physical arousal, and the audience feels the emotional weight of the relationship more strongly. The scene doesn't just show love, it creates the conditions that mimic it in the viewer. The study also has practical meaning in dating. Going on a roller coaster or trying something new together might make people feel closer. It's not that thrill causes love directly, but it raises arousal levels. If the person next to you seems like a possible match, your brain might credit them for the way you feel. This doesn't mean feelings formed this way are fake, but it does show that emotions are shaped by more than just the person involved. The misattribution of arousal can also explain confusion. People might feel drawn to someone without knowing why. If their body is tense from another source, like caffeine, lack of sleep, or anxiety, they might mistake that feeling as attraction or excitement. This doesn't mean they don't care about the person. It means the feeling is mixed with physical cues from other causes. The Bridge study sparked more research into how physical states influence judgment. Later studies found similar effects in other areas. People who watch a scary movie may rate others as more attractive. People who have just exercised may feel more confident or excited. Again, the body responds, and the brain searches for a cause. Still, the original study has limits. It only looked at young men and used one type of physical setting. The situation was staged, and the behavior measured, calling a phone number, is not a perfect sign of attraction, but the basic idea holds up. Many later studies support the view that context matters in emotional experience. What the Bridge study teaches is that emotion is not just something we feel, it's something we build from clues. The body gives one piece of the puzzle, the setting gives another. Together, they shape how we understand what we feel. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but the body's signals are real, and they matter. What we do with them depends on where we are, who we're with, and what story our minds choose to tell. In 1968, psychologist Robert Zajonc published a series of studies showing that people tend to like things more when they are exposed to them repeatedly. This became known as the mere exposure effect. It means that the more often you see or hear something, the more likely you are to feel positive toward it, even if you don't remember seeing it before or never paid close attention to it. You don't need to think deeply about the thing. You just need to encounter it again and again. Zajonc ran experiments using simple stimuli like nonsense words, shapes, or foreign symbols. He showed participants a set of items at different rates. Some were shown just once, others several times. Later, he asked people to rate how much they liked each item. Without knowing it, participants gave higher ratings to the items they had seen more often. This held true even though they didn't remember which ones they had seen before. Exposure alone was enough to change their feelings. This effect applies to many areas of life. In music, a new song may not seem appealing at first, but after hearing it a few times on the radio or in a store, it starts to sound better. People begin to hum along without realizing how their opinion changed. Advertisers rely on this effect when they repeat brand names, logos, and jingles. A product that feels familiar is more likely to be chosen, even if the person doesn't recall the ad or pay attention to the message. Familiarity creates comfort. The same effect works with faces. In studies where participants are shown a group of unfamiliar faces multiple times, they tend to rate the repeated faces as more trustworthy or attractive than those they've only seen once. The faces don't change, the people don't interact, but familiarity makes them seem better. It's not a conscious decision, it's a natural result of repeated exposure. The mere exposure effect also helps explain how friendships and relationships start. People who spend time together, such as classmates, co-workers, or neighbors, often grow closer over time even without deep conversations. Just being in the same place, seeing each other often, builds a base of comfort. Someone who felt neutral at first starts to seem more likable. This is why proximity matters. The people you see most often are more likely to become friends. In one example, researchers placed 4 women of similar appearance in a college class. Each woman attended a different number of sessions. Some went to many, some to only one. At the end of the term, students rated how much they liked each woman. The more often a woman had attended class, the higher her rating, even though she never spoke during the sessions. Her presence alone increased how much students liked her. The effect can also shape attitudes toward ideas. If someone hears a phrase or viewpoint often enough, it starts to sound more reasonable. It doesn't mean the person agrees, but the view feels less strange. This is one reason why repeated messaging in politics or media can shift public opinion. Ideas that once seemed unfamiliar or extreme may become more accepted through repetition alone. The effect works best when the exposure is brief and spaced over time. Seeing something many times in a row can feel annoying or overwhelming, but spaced repetition builds comfort without drawing attention. This is why advertising schedules aim to repeat messages across days or weeks, not all at once. Subtle, repeated cues work better than one big push. Familiarity also reduces uncertainty. When something feels known, it feels safer. People are more likely to choose a product or person that feels predictable. This doesn't mean they think it's better in every way, but they feel more comfortable with it. The brain tends to prefer low effort. Familiar things require less mental work. That makes them easier to process and, in turn, more likable. The effect has limits. If the original impression is strongly negative, more exposure can reinforce dislike. A grating jingle or an offensive message won't become likable just by repeating it. The effect is strongest when the original reaction is neutral or slightly positive. Repetition can move the needle toward liking, but it can't always reverse a strong reaction. In relationships, the mere exposure effect can play a role in early attraction. 2 people who see each other often at work, school, or social events may start to develop a sense of connection. Even before they speak much, the repeated presence creates a sense of closeness. Later, when they do interact, the familiarity gives a head start. It's not love at first sight. It's comfort through repeated contact. The same process works in reverse. When someone disappears from regular contact, they can begin to fade from memory. Out of sight often means out of mind. If a coworker moves to a different team or a neighbor moves away, the lack of exposure can weaken the bond, even without conflict. That's why relationships often need ongoing contact to stay strong. Asch's work also showed that emotion comes before understanding. People liked things they didn't recognize or understand, simply because they had seen them before. This goes against the idea that we like what we understand. In some cases, we start to understand what we like after the fact. Emotion leads the way, and the brain fills in reasons later. This insight challenged earlier views of how attitudes form. It showed that feelings don't always come from logic or deep thought. They can come from something as simple as seeing the same thing over and over. The effect happens fast, often before the person has time to reflect. It's automatic. The findings have shaped areas beyond psychology. Marketers, educators, and designers use the effect to guide how they present information. In teaching, repetition of key ideas across time helps students feel more familiar with material. In user design, repeated layout and symbols help people feel at ease with a tool or app. The more familiar the structure, the more likely people are to keep using it. The mere exposure effect also offers a reason to be cautious. Repeating a message, face, or idea can create preference, even if there's no good reason for it. People may favor a familiar brand or slogan over a better one simply because it's been seen more. This doesn't mean people are shallow. It means the brain works through simple rules when overloaded with choices. Zayonch's studies gave a clear message. People often like what they see more, not what they see best. Familiarity doesn't guarantee value, but it changes feelings. In a crowded world, what shows up more often has a better chance of being liked, whether it's a song, a face, a brand, or a belief. Repeated contact builds ease, and ease often leads to preference, even when we're not aware it's happening. In a series of studies, psychologists Eli Finkel and Paul Eastwick explored how people make romantic choices. They used speed dating as a real-world setting to test attraction. Their work showed that people are not very good at predicting what traits they will find attractive in others. Before meeting face-to-face, they might say they want someone with specific qualities, like intelligence, humor, or ambition. But once they meet someone in person, their preferences often shift. What they say they want doesn't always match who they feel drawn to. In a typical speed dating study, participants fill out surveys before the event. They list traits they think matter most in a partner. Some say they want someone outgoing. Others focus on shared values or physical appearance. After that, they go on a series of short, timed dates, usually lasting 4 to 6 minutes. After each mini-date, they record how much they liked the person and whether they want to see them again. The researchers then compare what people said they wanted with who they actually chose. The results are clear. Stated preferences often fail to predict actual attraction. Someone who claimed to want a witty partner might end up liking someone quiet. Another who said looks mattered most might choose someone with average appearance but high energy. The match between pre-date ideals and post-date decisions is often weak. This pattern suggests that attraction is less about a checklist and more about a feeling that comes from real interaction. People may have clear ideas about what they think they like, but those ideas don't always guide their choices when they meet someone in person. The moment-to-moment experience, the tone of voice, eye contact, smile, or shared rhythm plays a bigger role than expected. In one version of the study, participants not only rated what they wanted in a partner, but also guessed which people at the event they'd be attracted to based on photos and profiles. Again, they often guessed wrong. People who looked good on paper or in pictures didn't always spark interest during the date. Meanwhile, others who didn't match stated preferences turned out to be more appealing. Finkel and Eastwick found that the in-person interaction reveals information that profiles and lists cannot. There's something in the way people talk, listen, and respond that shapes attraction in real time. Chemistry is hard to predict. A short conversation can shift a person's feelings in a way that no written trait can explain. The findings also raise questions about dating apps and online profiles. Many platforms ask users to describe their ideal partner. They show lists of traits, interests, and values. But these studies suggest that those lists may not help much in finding a match. What people say they want and what they respond to in person often differ. This gap may explain why some online matches don't lead to strong in-person connections. The speed dating studies also explored what types of traits do matter in live interactions. Some qualities, like physical attractiveness and sociability, tend to have stronger effects across the board. But even then, it's not just about looks or charm, it's about how those traits come across in the moment. A person might seem attractive in photos, but appear stiff or dull in conversation. Another might seem average at first glance, but win people over with warmth or humor. Gender differences showed up in some parts of the studies, but not always in the way people expect. While both men and women valued physical attractiveness, women were just as likely as men to choose partners who didn't match their stated preferences. The gap between what people say and what they choose affected everyone. It wasn't about being shallow or changing minds. It was about discovering preferences that were not clear until the meeting happened. Finkel and Eastwick also tested how social roles affected attraction. In one study, they reversed the usual format of speed dating. Instead of men moving from table to table while women stayed seated, they had the women move while men stayed in place. Surprisingly, the act of rotating increased how interested the mobile participants felt toward others. The change in role made the active person more engaged and more likely to express attraction. This suggests that small shifts in setting or behavior can influence how attraction forms. These studies show how flexible preferences are. People think they know what they want, but that belief is based more on ideas than experience. Once they meet someone, their actual choices are shaped by the interaction itself, how it feels to talk, whether there's a natural back and forth, and how comfortable they feel. This doesn't mean that values and traits don't matter. It means that the way those traits are expressed and how they are received matters more than people expect. The speed dating findings also highlight the difference between decision-making based on abstract thinking and decisions based on direct experience. In many areas of life, people rely on gut feelings or instinct in the moment. Romantic attraction works the same way. It's a fast, intuitive response to another person, not a logical assessment of a checklist. People might claim they prefer certain traits, but those traits don't always guide their real-time choices. This insight helps explain why relationships sometimes form between people who seem mismatched on paper. It also helps explain why people sometimes feel disappointed when meeting someone who matches their stated preferences. The match may exist on paper, but not in person. The chemistry might not be there. The timing, tone, or connection may fall short. Real attraction doesn't follow a script. These results can help people take pressure off themselves during dating. Instead of searching for someone who checks every box, it may be better to focus on how the interaction feels. Am I enjoying this conversation? Do I feel seen and heard? Do we laugh together? These questions might matter more than whether the person has a certain job, height, or hobby. The studies also challenge the idea that attraction is fixed or fully knowable in advance. Preferences can shift based on context. A trait that seems essential in theory may matter less in practice. Someone may discover that kindness or calmness means more to them than they expected. They may feel drawn to someone who surprises them, not because the person is ideal, but because something in the exchange feels right. The work of Finkel and Eastwick shows that attraction is not just about matching traits. It's about real-time responses. It's shaped by voice, movement, eye contact, and the rhythm of conversation. It's influenced by roles, environment, and even small cues that can't be written down. What feels right often wins over what sounds right. People can use this understanding to approach dating with more openness. Instead of overthinking the list of must-haves, they can pay closer attention to how each interaction feels. They can stay curious about who draws their interest, even if that person doesn't fit their usual type. In the end, the face-to-face moment reveals what no profile or survey can fully predict. The human connection, not the checklist, decides. The matching hypothesis is a simple but powerful idea in psychology. It says that people tend to form relationships with others who are about as physically attractive as they are. This doesn't mean people always pair up with someone who looks exactly like them, but rather that most people choose partners who fall within a similar level of attractiveness. This pattern has been found in both dating and long-term relationships. The idea came from observations in real life. When you look at couples around you, whether in schools, cities, or media, you often see a rough balance. Some people might be slightly more attractive than their partners, but dramatic differences are rare. The matching hypothesis helps explain why this happens. It's not just about who people find attractive, but also about who they think will return that interest. Early studies tested this by asking strangers to rate photographs of people for attractiveness. Then, researchers compared these ratings to the attractiveness ratings of the person's romantic partner. Across many studies, couples were more likely to be similar in appearance than not. When researchers tracked how people formed new relationships, they found that matching often happened early in the process, before the couple grew close. One classic study had participants rate their own attractiveness and then rate how attractive they thought their partners were. The results showed that people tended to see their partners as roughly equal to themselves. When there were mismatches, people often made up the gap in other ways, through personality, humor, kindness, or status. But physical appearance remained an important starting point. Researchers believe this matching happens partly because of social feedback. From an early age, people learn where they stand in terms of attractiveness. They pick up cues from how others treat them. If someone gets a lot of positive attention, they may feel more confident reaching out to attractive partners. If someone faces more rejection, they may lower their expectations over time. This isn't always fair, but it shapes behavior. Another factor is fear of rejection. People don't just chase the most attractive person they see. They consider whether the person is likely to say yes. Most people want to avoid the pain of being turned down, so they tend to approach others who seem to be in a similar range, someone they believe will find them attractive too. The goal isn't to settle, but to make a match that feels possible. This pattern also appears in dating apps. While users may scroll through many profiles, they usually message people who seem to match their own looks. Studies of app behavior show that people tend to reach up a little, messaging someone slightly more attractive than they are, but not too far. When they do reach too far, the chance of getting a reply drops. Over time, users adjust and aim closer to their own level of attractiveness. The matching hypothesis doesn't mean people are shallow. Physical appearance is just one piece of attraction. People also value humor, kindness, intelligence, and shared values. But early attraction often starts with looks, especially when people don't know each other yet. Later, other traits play a bigger role. Long-term couples often say their connection grew stronger based on personality and shared experience. But matching on appearance can help get the relationship started. The idea also applies to friendships, though in a softer way. Friends often show some level of physical similarity, whether in grooming, dress, or general attractiveness. This may happen because people feel comfortable around those who seem similar to them. It may also be that social groups form based on shared values and lifestyle, which often include how people present themselves. In romantic relationships, the matching effect can offer stability. When both people feel they are well matched, they may feel more secure and satisfied. If one person feels out of their league, they may worry about losing their partner. This can lead to jealousy or insecurity. Matching helps balance expectations and reduce tension. It creates a sense that both people are getting a fair deal. Sometimes people do form relationships with large gaps in attractiveness. These pairs often get public attention, especially when one partner is famous or wealthy. In those cases, other traits, such as status, confidence, or charm, can play a larger role. But such cases are less common in the general population. Most people pair up with someone whose looks and lifestyle are not far from their own. Over time, attraction can shift. A couple that matched well in their 20s may look different in their 40s, but their bond can remain strong. What matters then is the deeper connection they built. People often say their partner becomes more attractive to them over time, not because of physical changes, but because of shared history and emotional closeness. A matching hypothesis also helps explain why some people struggle with dating. If someone has an inflated view of their own attractiveness, they may chase partners who aren't likely to respond. If they face repeated rejection, they may feel confused or hurt. On the other hand, someone who underestimates their appeal may not take chances with people who would be open to them. In both cases, mismatches between self-image and reality can lead to frustration. Social influences shape how people judge attractiveness. Cultural standards play a role, as do media images and peer opinions. But within those broad patterns, individuals still have unique tastes. What one person finds attractive, another may not. Matching doesn't mean everyone sees attractiveness the same way. It means people tend to match within their own frame of reference. One criticism of the matching hypothesis is that it simplifies attraction. People sometimes match on personality or interests rather than appearance. But researchers have found that even when other factors matter, physical matching still shows up. It may not explain every relationship, but it's a consistent pattern in how people choose partners. Some researchers suggest that matching also helps avoid conflict. When people see each other as equals, they may feel more balanced in the relationship. There's less worry about one person having more options or holding more power. The relationship feels more fair, which can make it more stable over time. Matching also applies to initial impressions. In studies where people watch videos of couples, observers tend to assume that couples who look similar are happier and more stable. This shows how strong the link between matching and perceived compatibility can be. People assume that matching means harmony, even if they don't know the couple. The matching hypothesis is not a rule, but a pattern. It helps explain how people choose partners, how they manage expectations, and how relationships begin. It reminds us that attraction is partly social and partly personal. People look for connection, but they also look for balance. They want to feel desired, but also secure. Matching on appearance is one way to meet those needs in early stages of attraction. Over time, other forms of matching, emotional, intellectual, and moral, become just as important. But physical similarity often opens the door. Misattribution of arousal is a term used in psychology to describe what happens when someone feels physical arousal, like a racing heart, quick breathing, or tense muscles, and wrongly believes it's caused by something other than the true source. This mistake happens because the body reacts first, and the mind looks for a reason afterward. If the mind picks the wrong cause, it can lead to confused or exaggerated emotions. The idea came from the two-factor theory of emotion, proposed by psychologists Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer. They argued that emotions come from two things: physical arousal and a label the brain puts on that arousal. The body has a reaction, and then the brain asks, "What's causing this feeling?" Depending on the answer, the person feels fear, excitement, anger, or even love. A well-known example of misattribution of arousal is the suspension bridge study by Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron in 1974. In that study, male participants were approached by a female experimenter while standing on either a high, shaky suspension bridge or a stable, low bridge. She asked them to complete a short survey and offered her phone number in case they had questions. The men who met her on the shaky bridge were much more likely to call her later, and they wrote more suggestive content in a short story they were asked to complete. The researchers concluded that the men were physically aroused from fear, caused by the height and instability of the bridge, but misread that feeling as attraction to the woman. That's how misattribution of arousal works. The body gets worked up from one source, but the mind connects that feeling to whatever is nearby. If the person sees someone they find even slightly interesting, the arousal is often mistaken for romantic or sexual interest. This doesn't just happen with fear. Exercise can have the same effect. After running or biking, the heart beats faster, blood pressure rises, and adrenaline increases. If someone meets a potential partner during that time, the heightened state might be read as romantic interest. The person may believe they feel drawn to the other person, when really their body is still reacting to the workout. Movies and amusement parks also make use of this. Watching a thriller or riding a roller coaster creates arousal. People feel excited, nervous, or thrilled. If they're with someone attractive during that time, they might connect those feelings to the person. Even though the cause is the movie or the ride, the brain links the arousal to the person's presence. This effect can also happen in arguments. When someone is angry or tense, they're already in a heightened state. If another person enters the room, the strong physical feeling might get directed at them, even if they're not involved. The emotional intensity doesn't always match the actual cause. Misattribution can also lead to stronger emotional memories. If someone feels anxious during an experience, they may later remember it as more exciting or intense than it really was. The memory is shaped by how their body felt at the time. The brain doesn't always separate the cause of the arousal from the people or events nearby. In dating situations, this idea has real impact. People often say that chemistry matters, but chemistry can be influenced by setting, timing, and physical state. Meeting someone after a long walk, during a high-energy event, or in a slightly tense setting can raise arousal. That arousal can boost the feeling of attraction, even if the person isn't a great match. This doesn't mean the attraction isn't real, but it may be partly based on the setting rather than on true compatibility. The misattribution effect can also lead people to overestimate how much someone else likes them. If both people are in an arousing situation, like a fast-paced date or a competitive game, they may mirror each other's energy and read that as mutual interest. But later, when things calm down, the feeling may fade. What seemed like connection might have been shared arousal with no deeper link. This effect doesn't always involve romantic feelings. Someone might feel irritated, excited, or even sad without knowing why. If the body is aroused, the brain searches for an explanation. If it picks the wrong one, the emotion might seem misplaced. A person might feel annoyed during a meeting, not because of the content, but because they had caffeine or skipped lunch. But their brain labels the arousal as frustration with the speaker or the topic. In the lab, researchers have tested this effect in many ways. In one study, participants were told they were being given a vitamin. In fact, they were injected with adrenaline, which caused physical arousal. Some were told the injection would cause these effects, while others were not. Those who weren't told tried to explain their arousal in terms of what was happening around them. If they were in a happy setting, they reported feeling good. If they were in a tense setting, they said they felt angry or anxious. The same physical reaction led to different emotions based on context. This shows that the body's signals are not labeled. They are raw data: faster heartbeat, shaky hands, tight chest. The mind then applies meaning. It says, I must be nervous, or I must be in love, or this must be fun. But that meaning can be wrong. The body doesn't tell us what we're feeling. It just tells us that something is happening. Misattribution of arousal helps explain mood swings, intense first impressions, and quick changes in how we feel about people. It reminds us that emotions are not always based on careful thought. They are shaped by how the body reacts and how the brain interprets that reaction. Knowing this can help people pause and ask, what's really going on here, before acting on strong feelings. In therapy or self-reflection, this idea can help people understand confusing reactions. A person might feel suddenly attracted to someone or strongly annoyed with a partner. If they stop to consider their physical state, tired, hungry, excited, they might realize the feeling is more about their condition than the person. This doesn't make the emotion fake, but it helps explain it. Misattribution of arousal shows how emotion depends on both the body and the situation. It's not just what we feel, it's what we think caused the feeling, and sometimes we get it wrong. The heart may race from fear or exercise, but the brain connects it to the nearest face, voice, or event. That's why knowing where feelings come from can be just as important as knowing what they are. Self-perception theory was proposed by psychologist Daryl Bem in 1972. It offers a simple but powerful idea about how people understand their own thoughts and feelings. Instead of looking inward or accessing deep beliefs, people often figure out what they think by looking at what they do. They observe their behavior and then draw conclusions about their attitudes based on that behavior. This theory challenges the older idea that people always have direct access to their inner states. According to Bem, people sometimes understand themselves the same way they understand others, by watching actions and making sense of them. Imagine someone asks you, "Do you like jazz?" You pause and think. You don't recall thinking about it much, but then you remember that you often listen to a jazz station while cooking, and that you went to a jazz concert last year and stayed the whole time. You then say, "Yes, I guess I do like jazz." You didn't begin with a clear attitude. Instead, you used your actions as evidence and formed an attitude from there. This is the core of self-perception theory. When people don't have strong feelings or clear answers, they look at their behavior to figure it out. The process is not always conscious. It feels like a natural reflection. I see what I'm doing, so this must be what I believe. One of Bem's key points is that this happens mostly when internal cues are weak or unclear. If you feel a strong emotion, like joy or anger, you don't need to guess how you feel. But in many day-to-day situations, feelings are vague or missing. You don't always know what your views are, especially about new topics. That's when you turn to your own actions as a guide. Researchers tested this idea in several experiments. In one study, participants were asked to read statements out loud while either nodding or shaking their heads. The nodding group later agreed more with the statements, while the head-shaking group agreed less. The participants weren't told the movement had meaning. They just moved as instructed. Yet their attitudes shifted in a way that matched the direction of their movement. Nodding made them feel like they agreed. Their physical behavior influenced how they judged their own beliefs. Another study showed that people who were paid a small amount to complete a dull task later reported liking the task more than people who were paid a large amount. The small reward group had little external reason to do the task, so they concluded they must have liked it. The large reward group had a clear reason. They did it for the money, so they didn't need to like the task to justify doing it. This fits with the idea that people explain their own actions based on what seems to make sense in the situation. Self-perception also plays a role in how people form identities. For example, someone might notice that they volunteer regularly, help neighbors, and donate to charities. From those actions, they infer, "I must be a caring person." Another person who speaks up often in meetings and takes charge in group tasks may come to believe, "I must be a natural leader." These attitudes are not always formed in advance. They grow from noticing patterns in one's behavior over time. This theory helps explain how small changes in behavior can lead to changes in belief. If someone starts recycling regularly because their city makes it easy, they might later decide they care about the environment. The action comes first, the attitude follows. This can also work in reverse. If someone acts in ways that go against their past beliefs, they might adjust those beliefs to match the behavior. It also applies in relationships. Suppose you often spend time helping a friend move, drive them to appointments, or listen to their problems. You might not have started with a strong opinion about the friendship, but after doing these things, you might think, "I must really value this friendship," because your actions show care and commitment. Again, the behavior leads the belief. Marketers and campaigners sometimes rely on this idea. They may ask people to take small actions like signing a petition, sharing a message, or wearing a pin. Once people do these things, they may adjust their attitudes to match. They may say, "If I sign that petition, I must support this cause." The change begins with action, not inner belief. A theory also provides insight into how people explain their moods. If you find yourself smiling more than usual, You may start to think you're in a good mood, even if you weren't aware of it at first. If you're frowning and withdrawn, you might assume you're feeling down. The brain uses the body's signals as part of its judgment about emotions. This view lines up with other ideas in psychology that link emotion and physical state. One reason self-perception matters is that it gives people a way to shape their own attitudes through behavior. If you want to feel more confident, you might start by acting confident, speaking up, making eye contact, or standing tall. Over time, those behaviors can feed back into your self-view. You begin to believe you are confident because you see yourself acting that way. The theory doesn't say people never know how they feel. Many times they do, but when emotions are weak, unclear, or mixed, behavior fills the gap. People look at what they do, when they did it, and why, and then draw a conclusion about their attitude. It's not a perfect system, but it works well enough in many parts of life. There are limits to this process. If someone is forced or heavily rewarded to act in a certain way, they are less likely to see that action as reflecting their true attitude. They'll say, "I did it because I had to," not, "I must believe this." So the context matters. People look for signs that their behavior came from their own choice. If it feels voluntary, it has more power to shape attitudes. Self-perception theory helps explain how people grow, change, and make sense of themselves. It shows that identity is not always fixed or discovered through deep introspection. Often, it is built from the outside in. People see what they do, hear how they speak, and watch how they respond to others. From those actions, they learn what kind of person they are. And sometimes, they surprise themselves. The false consensus effect is a bias in how people see the world. It happens when someone assumes that most others think the same way they do. People overestimate how much others share their opinions, values, and behaviors. This effect shows up in everyday choices, social judgments, and even major decisions. It makes people believe that their way of thinking is more common than it actually is. Psychologists first studied this effect in the late 1970s. In one classic experiment, researchers asked people what they would do in a certain situation, such as whether they would agree to wear a sign that said, "Eat at Joe's." Some people said yes, others said no. Then they were asked to guess how many other people would make the same choice. People who said yes thought most others would also say yes. People who said no believed most others would say no. Each group thought their own choice was the common one. This effect is not limited to signs or small tasks. It shows up in politics, religion, health habits, and moral views. For example, someone who supports a specific political candidate might assume that most people in their city, or even the whole country, also support that candidate. Someone who eats only plant-based food might assume that many others are also shifting to that lifestyle, even if that's not true. People use their own views as a reference point and project them onto the wider world. The false consensus effect happens partly because of how people form social circles. Friends, family members, and coworkers often share similar backgrounds and beliefs. So when people talk to others in their circle, they hear agreement more often than disagreement. Over time, this makes their views feel normal or widespread, even if they're not. The people around them confirm their beliefs, which gives a false sense of how common those beliefs are. Social media can make this even stronger. Algorithms show users more of what they already like. If someone clicks on certain stories or follows certain people, they'll see more of the same kind of content. This creates a bubble where their views seem popular and opposing views seem rare or extreme. This kind of exposure shapes how people judge public opinion. It makes it harder to see the full picture. The false consensus effect also shows up in how people explain behavior. When someone sees others making different choices, they may think those people are confused, biased, or misinformed. Instead of accepting that people have different values or priorities, they assume there's a mistake. This reinforces the belief that their own way is correct and common. For example, a person who avoids alcohol might assume that most people also avoid it, and that those who drink do so because of peer pressure or bad judgment. A person who drives fast may assume that speeding is normal and that people who follow the speed limit are being overly cautious. In both cases, the person uses their own behavior as a standard and judges others based on how close they come to it. This bias also affects group decisions. In workplaces or teams, people may speak up based on the assumption that others agree with them. If no one pushes back, the belief becomes stronger. But sometimes, others stay quiet, not because they agree, but because they don't want conflict. This silence is misread as support. It can lead to poor decisions if people assume consensus when it doesn't exist. False consensus can also affect risk perception. If someone believes that most people don't take a certain health risk seriously, they may feel safe ignoring it. For example, during a public health crisis, someone might say, "No one I know is wearing a mask, so it must not be that important." That belief shapes behavior, which then confirms the idea, especially if others in their circle think the same way. The bias can lead to tension between groups. When people believe their views are shared by most others, they may become less open to compromise. They see their position as the default and other views as fringe or extreme. This can happen in politics, where each side believes it speaks for the silent majority. It can also happen in communities, where people underestimate how much diversity of thought exists around them. Even when presented with facts that challenge their beliefs, people may cling to the idea that most others agree with them. They may question the data or assume it doesn't apply to their group. This is because people don't form their beliefs just from statistics. They form them from what they see and hear every day. If their daily experience shows support for their views, they believe that's what's true more broadly. The false consensus effect is not a sign of arrogance. It's a natural result of limited perspective. People use what they know, mainly their own thoughts, behavior, and social feedback, as a guide. But that guide is incomplete. No one has full access to how others think, so the brain fills in the gaps by assuming that others are like us. Still, the effect can cause problems. It can lead to overconfidence in opinions, poor communication, and missed opportunities to learn. When people assume agreement, they may not ask questions or listen closely. They may shut down conversations before they start. That limits understanding and creates division. Awareness helps reduce the effect. When people stop and think, "Do I really know what others believe?" they may become more open to other views. Seeking out diverse voices, reading a range of perspectives, and asking honest questions can all help. So can remembering that personal experience is just one part of the larger picture. Teachers, leaders, and anyone working in groups can benefit from this awareness. Before making assumptions about what a group thinks, they can gather feedback. They can ask questions in ways that invite honest answers, not just agreement. This creates a space where real differences can come out. The false consensus effect also has practical uses. In marketing, understanding this bias helps explain why people are often surprised when products fail. A company may test an idea with a small group, get positive feedback, and assume the idea will work everywhere. But if the test group isn't diverse, the feedback won't reflect the full market. The company assumes consensus where there is none. In law and politics, the effect can influence voting and public opinion. Voters may feel confident that their side will win because everyone I talk to feels the same. When results don't match that belief, they may feel shocked or betrayed. This shows the gap between personal networks and the broader public. False consensus also plays a role in moral decisions. People may believe that their sense of right and wrong is widely shared. This belief can shape how they judge others and how they respond to disagreement. If they assume others agree, they may see any challenge as not just different, but wrong. That can lead to moral conflict or even aggression. In the end, The false consensus effect is a reminder of how limited personal perspective can be. It shows how much people rely on their own experience to make sense of the world. That strategy often works, but it also leads to mistakes. Knowing that others think differently is not just about tolerance, it's about accuracy. It helps people make better decisions, build stronger relationships, and respond more clearly to the world around them. The spotlight effect is a bias that causes people to think others are paying more attention to them than they really are. This idea came from research by Thomas Gilovich and his colleagues in 2000. In one of their most well-known studies, they asked students to wear a bright, embarrassing t-shirt, often with a picture of Barry Manilow, a celebrity most students didn't like, and then enter a room full of other students. After leaving the room, the person wearing the shirt guessed how many people had noticed the shirt. On average, they believed that about half the people had noticed. In reality, only about a quarter had. This shows that people often feel like they are in a spotlight, even when others barely notice them. The person wearing the shirt becomes highly aware of it, so they assume everyone else must be aware too. But the others in the room are focused on their own thoughts and concerns. They may glance up, but they don't give the shirt or the person much attention. The gap between how much we think others notice us and how much they actually do is what defines the spotlight effect. This bias doesn't only apply to clothing. It shows up in many parts of daily life. When someone says something awkward in a meeting or spills coffee on their shirt, they often believe others noticed and will remember. They replay the moment in their head, feel embarrassed, and assume it stood out. In truth, most people either didn't notice or quickly forgot. Everyone else is usually too focused on themselves to care much about someone else's mistake. Students often feel the spotlight effect when speaking in class. If they answer a question wrong or pause too long, they may feel like all eyes are on them and that their mistake will be remembered. But most classmates are thinking about their own answers or how much time is left in class. What feels like a big moment to one person may not register at all with others. The spotlight effect also applies to appearance. Someone may spend time worrying about a bad haircut, a stain on their clothes, or a breakout on their skin. They may believe everyone will notice and judge them for it. But the reality is that most people don't see these things, or if they do, they don't dwell on them. The attention we imagine isn't there. Social anxiety often involves the spotlight effect. People who worry about how they come across in social settings may overestimate how much others are watching, evaluating, or judging them. This can make it hard to relax or speak freely. They might assume a pause in conversation means others noticed something awkward, but the silence could just mean someone was thinking, or no one had anything urgent to say. The spotlight effect happens because we see the world from our own perspective. We know everything about what we're doing, thinking, and feeling. So when something feels important to us, whether it's a mistake, a joke, or an outfit, we believe others must see it the same way. But others don't have that same view. They're busy thinking about their own world. In one follow-up study, Gilovich asked people to recall a recent embarrassing moment and then estimate how long others would remember it. Participants guessed that most people would remember the event much longer than they actually did. In interviews, the other people in the room had either forgotten the event or barely noticed it in the first place. This has a calming effect once you understand it. Most people are not paying close attention to your flaws or awkward moments. They're worried about their own. When you leave a party thinking, "I said something dumb," someone else is leaving thinking the same thing about their own words. The spotlight is not on any one person. It's constantly moving, often focused inward on ourselves. This doesn't mean people never notice anything. Sometimes, someone does pick up on a mistake or awkward moment, but even then, the impact is often much smaller than we fear. Most people are forgiving. They might notice, but they don't hold on to it. What we carry with us is often not what others remember. Understanding the spotlight effect can help people take more risks. If someone wants to speak up in class, try a new outfit, or share an idea at work, fear of being judged might hold them back. But knowing that others probably won't notice or care as much as you think makes it easier to act. The cost of small errors or awkward moments is low, especially compared to the value of learning, connecting, or growing. It also helps with public speaking. Even experienced speakers feel nervous and worry about forgetting lines or stumbling over words. But the audience rarely notices every pause or misspeak. Most are focused on the message, not the delivery. And if something does go wrong, people are often more empathetic than judgmental. The spotlight effect can work in both directions. Sometimes, people think their successes or achievements will be noticed more than they are. Someone may assume that a new haircut, a kind gesture, or a good answer will stand out and be remembered. But again, others may not notice or may quickly move on. This is not because those actions don't matter, but because attention is limited. People notice less than we assume, both the good and the bad. This bias can be reduced through practice and reflection. One helpful step is to ask yourself, if someone else did this, would I care? Often, the answer is no. That helps reset your expectations. Another strategy is to focus more on others. Shifting attention outward helps reduce the sense that all eyes are on you. And when something does go wrong, reminding yourself of the spotlight effect can take the pressure off. If it felt huge to you, it probably felt small or invisible to everyone else, even in high-pressure settings. This effect holds. Students preparing for a presentation, job applicants in an interview, or people meeting someone new often feel like every move is being evaluated. But interviewers, teachers, and strangers are thinking about their own tasks, impressions, and reactions. Their attention is divided. The spotlight, if it exists at all, is not fixed in place. The spotlight effect is a reminder of how self-focused our view of the world can be. It's not vanity. It's just that we're always in our own head, but understanding that others are too, just as distracted, self-conscious, or preoccupied, can make us feel lighter. Mistakes matter less, risks seem safer, and connection becomes easier when we stop assuming all eyes are on us. Imposter syndrome is a pattern where capable and successful people believe they are not truly competent, even when they have strong evidence of their abilities. Awards, praise, promotions, they feel like frauds. They often think their success came from luck, timing, or others' mistakes rather than their own skill. This pattern is common among high-achieving individuals in many fields, from academics to medicine to the arts. It affects both men and women. Though early studies focused more on women in professional settings, the term was first used by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978. They interviewed successful women who consistently doubted their own achievements. These women had graduate degrees, awards, and professional recognition, yet still believed they had fooled others into thinking they were capable. The researchers noticed that these women were not just being modest. They truly believed they were not as competent as others thought they were. This feeling does not match the facts. Someone might be a published author, a respected engineer, or a skilled doctor, yet still lie awake at night, worrying that others will find out they are not really qualified. These people are not seeking praise or fishing for compliments. They feel genuine fear that their success is undeserved. Later research showed that imposter syndrome is not limited to gender. Men experience it too, though they may express it in different ways. Some downplay their successes, while others avoid new opportunities because they fear being exposed. In both cases, the person is stuck between external success and internal doubt. A key part of imposter syndrome is the belief that others have it figured out. People who feel like imposters often compare themselves to their peers. They assume others are more confident, more prepared, or more naturally gifted. They rarely consider that those peers might feel the same way. This creates a false sense of being alone in their doubts. It makes the feeling stronger. One reason this happens is how success is judged. People who feel like imposters often set very high standards for themselves. They believe they must be perfect, work harder than everyone else, or never make mistakes. When they fall short of those standards, as everyone does, they see it as proof that they don't belong. They ignore the fact that others also make errors, struggle, or feel unsure. Another factor is how people explain success. Many with imposter syndrome credit outside forces, luck, helpful mentors, or easy tasks for their achievements. When they fail, though, they take full blame. This pattern keeps their self-doubt in place. They believe success is accidental, but failure is personal. This mindset can affect behavior in several ways. Some people respond by overworking. They believe they must constantly prove themselves to avoid being found out. They say yes to every request, work long hours, and avoid rest. Others avoid challenges. They turn down promotions or new roles because they fear being exposed as unqualified. In both cases, the person is acting from fear, not ability. In studies of graduate students, many reported feeling like they didn't belong. Even when their performance matched or exceeded their peers, they believed others were smarter or more prepared. This feeling can be especially strong in competitive fields where people are surrounded by other high performers. It can also affect first-generation college students, people from underrepresented groups, or anyone entering a new space where they feel like an outsider. Imposter syndrome also affects public figures. Actors, authors, and CEOs have spoken about feeling like they don't deserve their success. They worry they will be found out or exposed. These stories show that no level of achievement guarantees freedom from doubt. Even people at the top of their field can feel uncertain. Researchers have explored ways to reduce imposter feelings. One effective approach is normalizing the experience. When people learn that these thoughts are common, they may feel less alone. Group discussions, mentorship programs, and workshops can help people speak openly about their doubts. This breaks the silence and helps others see that they are not the only ones who feel this way. Another helpful strategy is reframing failure and success. Instead of viewing every mistake as a sign of incompetence, people can learn to see it as part of growth. Success does not require perfection. It requires effort, learning, and persistence. Changing the way people interpret their performance can shift how they view themselves. Feedback plays a key role. Supportive and specific feedback can help people connect their achievements to their actions. A vague, "good job," may not help someone who feels like a fraud, but hearing exactly what they did well and why it mattered can give them something solid to hold on to. Over time, this can help build confidence that matches reality. Therapists often use cognitive behavioral methods to help clients with imposter syndrome. They work on identifying the thought patterns that feed doubt and replacing them with more accurate views. For example, someone might learn to question the belief that they must be perfect or that one mistake means total failure. They also practice recognizing their successes and owning them. The role of culture is also important. In some environments, silence around doubt is seen as strength. People may feel pressure to act confident even when they feel unsure. This makes it hard to admit imposter thoughts. In other settings, open talk about challenges and setbacks is encouraged. These environments can help reduce the shame linked to self-doubt. Workplaces and schools can support people by creating structures that highlight progress, not just outcomes. Celebrating effort, improvement, and teamwork can help shift focus away from constant self-evaluation. Leaders can also share their own stories of learning and doubt. When people in power admit to past struggles, it helps others feel safe doing the same. Imposter syndrome is not a clinical disorder, but it can lead to distress. It's linked to anxiety, depression, and burnout. People who constantly feel like they must prove themselves may wear down over time. They may also struggle to enjoy their work or accept recognition. Addressing these feelings early can prevent long-term harm. Research continues into how identity and background shape imposter feelings. Some groups may face added pressure to represent others like them, which can deepen the fear of failure. A person may not only worry about their own performance, but also about how others will view their group if they fall short. This adds weight to normal challenges and can make the stakes feel higher. At its core, imposter syndrome is a gap between how people see themselves and how others see them. They may appear confident, skilled, and successful to the outside world, but feel unsure on the inside. They struggle to connect their actions with their identity. The good news is that this gap can shrink. With support, reflection, and practice, people can begin to trust their own abilities and see their success not as luck, but as earned. Social comparison theory, proposed by Leon Festinger in 1954, explains how people evaluate themselves by looking at others. People don't always have a fixed sense of how smart, talented, or attractive they are. Instead, they measure these traits by comparing themselves to those around them. If someone runs faster than most of their peers, they may believe they are athletic. If they get lower grades than classmates, they may decide they are not very smart. The comparison helps shape self-image. Festinger believed that people have a basic drive to assess their abilities and opinions. When there is no clear or objective way to measure something, people turn to others. If a student wants to know whether they did well on a test, they might ask what grade others got. If most of the class scored lower, the student may feel successful. If most scored higher, they may feel disappointed. The score stays the same, but the feeling changes based on the comparison. There are two types of comparison: upward and downward. In upward comparison, someone compares themselves to a person who seems better in some way. This could be someone more skilled, more attractive, or more successful. Upward comparison can be motivating. It can push people to improve, but it can also lower self-esteem, especially if the gap feels too wide or the person doesn't believe they can catch up. A student who compares their grades to the top of the class might study harder, but they might also feel discouraged if they keep falling short. In downward comparison, someone compares themselves to others who seem worse off. This can boost self-esteem by offering a sense of relief or superiority. A person who just lost a job might feel slightly better by thinking of someone who lost both their job and home. This doesn't mean people enjoy others' pain. It means they use comparison to feel less alone or less defeated. Downward comparison can help people feel stable, but too much of it may lead to complacency. Social comparison is everywhere. In schools, students rank themselves against classmates. In sports, athletes compare scores, times, or skill levels. In the workplace, employees track promotions, salary, and praise. Even in daily life, people compare families, homes, bodies, vacations, and achievements. These comparisons are not always spoken, but they shape how people think and feel. Social media increases the frequency and visibility of comparisons. On platforms like Instagram or LinkedIn, people post highlights, vacations, awards, milestones, and filtered images. Others see these and form judgments about their own lives. Someone scrolling through vacation photos while sitting at home might feel left behind. Someone reading about a peer's new job might feel unaccomplished. Even if the post reflects only part of the truth, the comparison still affects the viewer. Research shows that these comparisons are not neutral. They affect mood, self-worth, and even behavior. People who make more upward comparisons on social media often report lower self-esteem and more anxiety. The gap between their lives and the lives they see online can feel wide, even if they know the posts are curated. At the same time, people who see posts from others who are struggling may feel grateful or lucky by comparison. The effect of comparison depends on context and mindset. If someone compares themselves to a more skilled person and thinks, "I can learn from them," the result can be positive. It can lead to growth. But if the thought is, "I'll never be that good," the result may be discouragement or even withdrawal. Belief in change and effort matters. The same comparison can lead to very different outcomes depending on how it's processed. Comparison can also influence choices. In one study, people were shown a group of peers who donated money to a cause. The more generous the peers, the more people donated themselves. But if the gap was too wide, if others gave much more than the person could afford, people were less likely to donate at all. This shows that comparison doesn't always push people up. If the target feels unreachable, people may give up. Festinger also noted that people prefer to compare themselves to others who are similar. A student compares to classmates, not professional researchers. A young athlete compares to others their age, not Olympic medalists. Similarity makes the comparison feel more relevant and fair. If the other person is too different, the comparison may be dismissed or ignored. People also tend to choose comparisons that match their goals. Someone looking to improve might seek out stronger performers. Someone feeling down might seek out weaker ones to feel better. This isn't always deliberate. The mind tends to move in the direction that supports the current emotional need. But it means comparison is not random. It serves a function, either growth, reassurance, or justification. Sometimes people compare on traits they care about most. A musician might feel fine about their looks or income, but get upset when others perform better. A parent might not mind a peer's promotion, but feel insecure about another family's success at raising well-behaved kids. The areas of life where people invest their identity are the ones where comparison hits hardest. That's why people can be confident in one area and insecure in another. Comparison can also lead to conflict or resentment. If someone sees a peer succeed in a shared space, like a workplace or community, they may feel envious, even if they like the person. They may wonder why that person succeeded or question their own worth. This isn't always expressed openly. It may come out as passive resistance, distancing, or quiet judgment. Children learn to compare early. In classrooms, they notice who finishes first, who gets praise, who struggles. These patterns shape self-image. A child who always sees others ahead may believe they are slow or behind. This belief can stick, even if their skills improve later. That's why how comparison is handled in schools matters. Encouraging effort and individual progress helps reduce harmful comparison. Ranking and public praise can make the gap feel bigger. In some cases, comparison leads to cooperation. In group settings, seeing others do well can set a standard. People may rise to meet it. If used carefully, this can lift performance, but it must be balanced with encouragement and support. Constant comparison without feedback can create fear or competition that harms group morale. People sometimes try to avoid comparison, but it's hard to stop. The brain constantly looks for reference points. Instead of trying to block comparison, people can shift how they use it. Asking, "What can I learn?" instead of "How do I rank?" can change the emotional tone. So can reminding yourself that others are also comparing and may feel the same doubts. Festinger's theory still holds value today. It explains not just how people measure themselves, but also why they often feel better or worse without obvious reason. A person can feel proud of their job until they learn what a peer earns. They can feel content with their home until they visit a friend's. The facts stay the same, but feelings change. Social comparison helps people understand where they stand, but it can also distort reality. Others show only parts of their lives. They have their own fears and struggles, often hidden. Remembering this can reduce the pressure to measure up. Comparison is natural, but it doesn't have to control how people see themselves. With awareness, people can use it as a tool, not a weight. Cognitive appraisal theory, developed by psychologist Richard Lazarus, explains how people experience emotions. The main idea is that emotions are not automatic reactions to events. Instead, how someone feels depends on how they interpret or appraise what's happening. It's the meaning they give to an event, not the event itself, that shapes the emotional response. Lazarus broke this process into two main steps: primary appraisal and secondary appraisal. In primary appraisal, a person evaluates whether an event is relevant to their goals, safety, or well-being. They ask themselves, is this a threat, a challenge, or something neutral? If they decide the event matters, they move to secondary appraisal. In this second step, they assess what resources they have to deal with the event. They ask, can I handle this? Or what can I do about it? Consider a common situation. Two people get called into a meeting with their boss on short notice. One person thinks, I must have done something wrong, and feels anxious. The other thinks, maybe I'm getting recognition, and feels excited. The meeting is the same for both people, but their emotional responses differ. This happens because their appraisals of the situation are different. One sees a threat, the other sees a possible reward. This theory helps explain why people respond so differently to the same event. Losing the job, for example, might lead one person to feel devastated and hopeless. They may appraise the loss as a threat to their future, their identity, and their security. Another person might feel frustrated but hopeful. They may see the loss as a challenge and think of it as a chance to start fresh. The event is the same, but the interpretations, and therefore the emotions, are different. Lazarus's model also helps explain how emotions can change over time. Imagine someone gets an unexpected bill in the mail. Their first response is panic, but then they look closer, realize it's a mistake, and feel relief. The emotional shift comes from a change in how they appraise the situation. At first, they saw it as a serious threat. Later, with more information, they saw it as manageable or even irrelevant. The model works across a wide range of situations. A person might feel anger when they believe someone wronged them on purpose. They appraise the event as unfair and intentional. But if they learn the action was an accident, their emotion may shift to understanding or even forgiveness. Again, the facts didn't change, only the meaning attached to them. In high-stress situations, the appraisal process can move quickly. A driver who sees another car swerve into their lane might instantly feel fear and slam on the brakes. In that moment, the brain does a fast appraisal. This is dangerous, and I must act now. Later, when they are safe, they may reassess the event. Maybe the other driver was avoiding a pothole. The emotional tone may shift from fear to annoyance, or even curiosity. The appraisal process happens fast, but it still shapes emotion. People don't always control how they first appraise a situation, but they can learn to adjust it. This is the basis of many coping strategies. Cognitive reappraisal, for example, involves looking at a stressful situation from a new angle. Someone who is nervous about public speaking might reframe it as a chance to share something meaningful instead of fearing judgment. This change in meaning can reduce anxiety and build confidence. In therapy, clients often explore how their interpretations create emotional distress. A person who believes, I must always succeed, may feel deep shame after making a mistake. The mistake isn't the problem. It's the belief about what the mistake means. Therapy helps people examine and, when needed, revise these appraisals. With new interpretations, emotions often shift too. Appraisals can be influenced by personality, culture, and past experience. An optimistic person might appraise setbacks as temporary and solvable, while a pessimistic person might see them as signs of permanent failure. A person from a culture that values community might appraise a group conflict as more serious than someone from a more individualistic culture. A person who has been hurt before might be more likely to see rejection or danger in neutral situations. These patterns shape how people read the world and what emotions they experience. Emotions also feed back into the appraisal process. A person in a good mood might see a neutral event in a positive light. Someone who is already anxious may appraise the same event as threatening. Emotions can cloud or color interpretation, which in turn shapes future emotion. This loop can build up over time, making some people feel stuck in certain emotional patterns. The theory also helps explain why some coping methods work better than others. Avoiding a problem might reduce stress for a short time, but if the person keeps appraising the situation as dangerous or unmanageable, the emotion will return. Active problem solving works better when it changes the appraisal to something more controllable. Social support can work by helping people reframe the situation. A friend might say, "This isn't the end of the world," and shift the person's view from crisis to setback. Cognitive appraisal theory also applies to positive emotions. When something good happens, people still go through a process of interpretation. Getting a compliment, for example, might make one person feel proud because they believe the praise is genuine and deserved. Another might feel embarrassed if they think the compliment was forced or sarcastic. Again, the meaning shapes the feeling. In group settings, appraisals can spread. If a leader treats a challenge as manageable, the group may feel calm. If they act panicked, others may read the situation as more serious than it is. Shared appraisals can influence how a team, family, or community responds to events. This is why framing matters in communication. The way a message is delivered shapes how people interpret it and how they feel in response. Appraisal theory also ties into motivation. People are more likely to take action when they appraise a situation as both important and within their control. If they see it as hopeless or irrelevant, they may do nothing. This applies to everything from studying for an exam to responding to climate change. The emotional response depends on how people read the situation, and that emotional response shapes behavior. Even in everyday life, small shifts in appraisal can change how a day feels. A delay in traffic might feel frustrating if seen as wasted time, but if reframed as a chance to listen to music or think, it might feel less stressful. The event doesn't change, the appraisal does. Cognitive appraisal theory provides a flexible and practical way to understand emotion. It shows that people are not just passive reactors to life. They interpret, judge, and assign meaning to what happens around them. Those judgments shape how they feel. With this knowledge, people can start to pay closer attention to their appraisals and learn how to adjust them when needed. The power to change how one feels often starts with changing how one sees. The facial feedback hypothesis suggests that your facial expression can influence how you feel. In other words, smiling doesn't just reflect happiness, it may also help create it. This idea goes back to early theories about emotion, but it gained wider attention after a study by Fritz Strack and his colleagues in 1988. They wanted to find out whether making a facial expression, even without an emotion behind it, could change how people felt. In the experiment, participants were asked to hold a pen in their mouth in one of two ways. One group held the pen with their teeth, which forced the muscles used in smiling to contract. The other group held the pen with their lips, which prevented a smile. The participants didn't know the true purpose of the study. They were told it was about physical coordination. After holding the pen in their mouths, they were asked to rate the funniness of cartoons. The results showed that people who held the pen with their teeth, mimicking a smile, rated the cartoons as funnier than those who held the pen with their lips. This led the researchers to conclude that smiling, even when not caused by real emotion, could increase positive feelings. The physical act of smiling seemed to feed back into the emotional system and influence mood. This finding fit with older theories of emotion, such as the Jaynes-Lang theory, which suggests that the body's response comes before the feeling. According to this view, we don't cry because we feel sad. We feel sad because we cry. The body reacts first, and the mind interprets the change. The idea is that facial muscles send signals to the brain. When you smile, those muscles create a pattern the brain associates with happiness. That signal may help trigger a shift in mood. The effect is not huge, but it can be enough to make a difference in how people interpret an experience. Other studies have tried to expand on this work. Researchers looked at whether frowning could make people feel more negative, or whether other expressions, like raising the eyebrows, could affect surprise. Some studies found support for these effects. For example, people who furrowed their brows while reading neutral material were more likely to rate the content as frustrating or confusing. But the story became more complicated when other researchers tried to repeat the original study. A large replication attempt in 2016, led by a team of over a dozen labs, failed to find the same result. In their version of the pen-in-mouth experiment, there was no clear difference in how funny the cartoons were rated between the two groups. This led some psychologists to question whether the original finding was reliable. One explanation for the failure to replicate is that small details of the setup matter more than expected. In Strack's original study, participants were not aware they were being observed. In some later replications, a video camera was present. Even though it wasn't used to record anything, its presence may have changed how participants behaved. Knowing that they might be watched could have made them more self-conscious, which could interfere with the effect. Another factor is that emotions are influenced by many things, not just facial muscles. A person's mood, environment, expectations, and personality all play a role. The facial feedback effect might be real, but small, easily influenced by context. If a person is already feeling good, smiling may boost that feeling slightly. Is they're feeling bad or distracted, the same facial movement may not do much. Some researchers argue that the method of forcing a smile matters. Holding a pen between your teeth may activate smile muscles, but it doesn't feel like a real smile. Other studies have used actors trained to produce natural-looking expressions or asked participants to mimic emotional faces by copying photos. These studies sometimes find stronger effects. This suggests that the quality and meaning of the expression might be more important than the muscle movement alone. There's also evidence from brain imaging studies. When people are asked to make emotional expressions, certain areas of the brain involved in emotion, like the amygdala, become active. These responses are not as strong as those caused by a full emotional experience, but they show that the face and brain are linked. That supports the idea that physical expression can influence internal state. Beyond the lab, the facial feedback hypothesis lines up with everyday experience. People often feel a little better when they smile, even if it starts as a choice. Athletes and performers sometimes smile before a competition or show to get into a positive mindset. Therapists may suggest smiling or using other body-based strategies to help shift mood. These approaches don't replace deeper work, but they can help people gain a bit of control over how they feel. One interesting question is whether people can use this on purpose. Can you smile during a hard moment and feel better? The answer seems to be sometimes. It depends on the person and the situation. If someone forces a smile while feeling overwhelmed, it may not help. But in a mild or neutral setting, smiling may tip the emotional balance. It might not create joy, but it can reduce tension or irritation. Another place facial feedback may show up is in social interaction. People who smile more are often seen as friendlier and more likable. This creates a feedback loop. Others respond more positively, which makes the smiler feel better, and they keep smiling. The emotional benefit may come partly from how others react, not just from the muscle movement. Children seem to pick up on these cues early, Babies mimic facial expressions and respond to smiles from adults. They may not know what a smile means, but they react to the pattern. As they grow, they learn the social and emotional meaning of different expressions. This learning shapes how they express and read emotions later in life. In some medical studies, researchers looked at people who had facial paralysis or nerve damage. These individuals sometimes report changes in how they experience emotion. If they cannot smile, they may feel less joy. This suggests that facial movement contributes to the full emotional experience, though it's not the only part. The body and brain work together. The facial feedback hypothesis remains a useful idea, even as the original study is debated. It reminds us that the connection between body and emotion is two-way. We think of emotions as starting in the mind, but the body helps shape them. The muscles in the face are part of that system. Even small signals can change how we feel, or at least how we interpret what we feel. What matters most may not be whether a fake smile always makes you happier, but the broader point that emotion is not only in the head. It's built from many sources: thoughts, surroundings, past experiences, and the body itself. Smiling might not fix a bad day, but in the right moment, it can help tip your mood in a better direction. And if nothing else, it can make others smile back, and that too can make a difference. Angela Duckworth and her colleagues introduced the idea that grit, the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals, can predict success better than intelligence alone. Intelligence, often measured by IQ, has long been viewed as the key to academic and professional achievement. But Duckworth's research challenges that view. It shows that people who stick with their goals over time, even when progress is slow or difficult, tend to achieve more than those who may be smarter but give up more easily. In one of Duckworth's well-known studies, she and her team followed students at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. All the cadets had high test scores and strong athletic records. They had already passed a tough selection process. The researchers wanted to know what predicted who would finish the first summer of training, a period known for its difficulty. Grit, not IQ or athletic ability, turned out to be the best predictor. Cadets with higher grit scores were more likely to finish the training, regardless of how smart or physically fit they were. Duckworth developed a simple grit scale to measure this trait. It includes questions like, "I finish whatever I begin," and "I often set a goal, but later choose to pursue a different one," reverse scored. People answer based on how much each statement sounds like them. The scale doesn't measure talent, but how committed someone is to long-term goals and how they respond to setbacks. In another study, Duckworth followed students in Chicago public schools. She found that grit predicted which students graduated, even when she controlled for IQ and family income. Students with higher grit scores were more likely to finish high school, suggesting that persistence plays a major role in academic success. Intelligence mattered, but it wasn't the whole story. Grit also showed strong effects in spelling bees. The National Spelling Bee is a contest that demands not only memory, but also practice and focus over long periods. Duckworth found that grit predicted which students advanced the furthest. Those with high grit scores studied more and stuck with preparation longer. Again, IQ and verbal ability played a role, but they didn't tell the full story. It was the students who put in sustained effort over time who performed best. One key idea behind grit is the difference between talent and effort. Duckworth argues that talent determines how fast you improve in a skill, but effort determines how far you go. In her model, skill is the product of talent and effort, and achievement is the product of skill and more effort. That means effort counts twice. Talent may give someone a quick start, but without effort, they don't build skill. Without more effort, They don't use the skill to accomplish anything meaningful. This doesn't mean IQ doesn't matter. Intelligence predicts how well someone learns new material, how quickly they solve problems, and how they perform on tests. But many real-world tasks, like building a business, writing a book, or training for a marathon, require long-term dedication. Intelligence helps, but it doesn't replace the need for grit. Grit is especially important when progress is slow or invisible. A student learning calculus may not understand it right away. A writer working on a novel may go months without positive feedback. A job seeker might face repeated rejection. People with grit keep going despite frustration. They don't give up when results don't come quickly. This persistence allows progress to build over time, even when it feels like nothing is happening. People sometimes mistake grit for stubbornness or blind persistence. But grit isn't about refusing to quit at all costs. It's about sticking with meaningful goals. Someone with grit may quit a short-term project if it distracts from a larger purpose. They may adjust their strategy if something isn't working. What matters is not just sticking with a task, but staying committed to the overall goal. Grit is also different from self-control. Self-control is about resisting short-term temptations. It helps a student study instead of checking their phone, or a runner get out of bed instead of sleeping in. Grit, in contrast, is about long-term stamina. It's what helps people keep working year after year on a goal that may not pay off right away. The two traits often work together. People with high self-control may be better able to stay on track, which supports grit. But they are not the same. Some researchers have raised concerns about grit. They argue that the trait overlaps with other qualities like conscientiousness, a personality trait that includes being organized, responsible, and hardworking. Critics also point out that grit may not always predict success in every context. In some environments, like unstable jobs or unsafe schools, persistence may not be enough. Structural factors like access to resources, discrimination, and random life events can affect outcomes, no matter how gritty a person is. Duckworth herself has responded to these critiques. She agrees that grit isn't everything. Context matters. A person with high grit may still face barriers that limit success. She also notes that grit is just one piece of the puzzle. It doesn't replace intelligence, social skills, or luck, but it adds something unique. It explains why some people succeed despite not having the highest test scores or the best early advantages. Some people worry that focusing on grit places too much pressure on individuals to succeed, even in unfair systems. They argue that praising grit can lead to blaming people for failing in environments stacked against them. That's why many educators and psychologists suggest that grit should be taught and encouraged in supportive settings, not demanded in ways that ignore broader challenges. Still, the idea of grit has been widely adopted. Schools, sports teams, and workplaces have used it to talk about the value of long-term effort. Teachers may encourage students to practice grit when facing hard material. Coaches may talk about grit when training athletes through setbacks. Leaders may use the idea to build cultures that value resilience and progress over time. There's also interest in how grit develops. Duckworth suggests that it grows through practice and purpose. Children may become grittier when they find something they care about and have chances to work at it over time. Support from adults, feedback, and role models help too. People may also build grit through small successes. Each time someone sticks with a challenge and sees results, their belief in effort grows. That belief makes it easier to keep going next time. Grit is not fixed. Like other character traits, it can change. People who once gave up easily may learn to push through. People who once bounced between goals may learn to stay focused. This flexibility makes grit valuable, not just as a trait to measure, but as a habit to build. In the end, grit helps explain why some people achieve great things, even when they don't start with the highest test scores or the best tools. It shows that sticking with a meaningful goal, especially when progress is slow, is often more important than natural ability alone. While intelligence opens doors, grit helps people keep walking through them. That's why grit, though not the only path to success, offers a powerful lens on what it means to grow, work, and persevere. In the early 1970s, psychologist Walter Mischel and his team conducted a study that came to be known as the marshmallow test. The setup was simple. A child sat at a table with a marshmallow in front of them. The researcher explained that the child could eat the marshmallow now, or wait a few minutes and get 2 marshmallows instead. Then the adult left the room. The test measured how long each child waited before giving in and eating the treat. Some children waited the full time and earned the second marshmallow. Others ate the first one within seconds. The researchers weren't just interested in who could wait. They followed many of the children for years to see how this early behavior might relate to their lives later on. The results were striking. Children who had waited longer tended to do better in school, score higher on standardized tests, and have fewer problems with attention. Some even had better physical health and more stable relationships in adulthood. The marshmallow test quickly became a symbol for self-control and future success. It seemed to show that the ability to delay gratification, choosing a larger reward later instead of a smaller one now, was a key to doing well in life. Parents, educators, and policymakers used the findings to stress the importance of teaching children patience and self-regulation. The test was appealing because it was simple and seemed to predict so much. A few minutes of waiting in childhood linked to outcomes decades later. The idea fit with common beliefs about success, that discipline matters more than quick rewards, and that those who can plan for the future are more likely to thrive. But years later, researchers began to look more closely at the study. They raised questions about what it really measured and whether the results had been overstated. One major concern was the role of a child's environment. Children from more stable, wealthier families were more likely to wait. Those from lower income backgrounds often ate the marshmallow right away. This raised the question, were children showing a lack of self-control, or were they responding to what they'd learned about the world? For a child who grows up in a home where food is sometimes scarce or promises are not always kept, waiting for a second marshmallow might not feel like a safe bet. They may have learned that it's better to take what's offered now than risk getting nothing later. In this light, eating the marshmallow right away could be a rational, even smart decision based on past experience. In 2018, a large replication study revisited the marshmallow test using a bigger and more diverse sample of children. The researchers found that the ability to delay gratification was still linked to better outcomes, but the effect was much smaller than earlier studies had suggested. When they controlled for factors like family income, parent education, and early cognitive ability, most of the connection disappeared. This showed that other variables, not just willpower, shaped later success. The new findings didn't prove the original research was wrong, but they gave a fuller picture. They suggested that delaying gratification doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's influenced by context. A child who trusts adults, who lives in a predictable environment, and who has been taught strategies for waiting, is more likely to hold off for the second marshmallow. That doesn't mean the child is better or stronger. It means they've had different experiences. Mischel himself acknowledged these points later in his career. He emphasized that the marshmallow test was never meant to predict success in isolation. It was meant to explore how children manage impulses and how they can learn to wait. In his later work, he focused more on the strategies children used to delay gratification, not just whether they waited or not. In follow-up interviews, Mischel found that children who succeeded at waiting didn't just sit and stare at the treat. They used tactics to distract themselves, looking away, singing songs, pretending the marshmallow was something else. These mental tricks made it easier to wait. This suggested that self-control isn't just a trait you have or don't have. It's something you can learn and improve. Modern research supports this view. Self-regulation can be developed. Children can be taught how to pause, think ahead, and manage frustration. These skills take practice and support. They don't come automatically. Programs that build executive function, the brain's control system for focus, memory, and decision-making, have shown promise in helping kids improve self-control. At the same time, researchers have noted that self-control is just one part of success. Traits like curiosity, creativity, empathy, and resilience also matter. Focusing too much on delay of gratification may miss the full picture of what helps people thrive. There's also the risk of blaming children for circumstances beyond their control. If a child struggles to wait, it may reflect stress at home, instability, or lack of access to support. Framing the issue only in terms of individual willpower can overlook the systems that shape behavior. Instead of asking why a child can't wait, it may be more useful to ask what might help them feel safe enough to try. Some researchers have explored how culture shapes the decision to wait. In societies where group cooperation is valued, children may delay gratification more easily if they believe it helps the group. In other cultures, speed and spontaneity may be more valued. What looks like poor self-control in one context may make sense in another. The meaning of waiting is not the same everywhere. The marshmallow test also connects to broader ideas about human behavior. Adults face versions of the same choice every day: save money or spend it, study or relax, eat healthy or indulge. Delaying gratification is often linked to future benefits, but it comes at a cost in the present. People make these decisions based on habits, mood, culture, and experience. Like the children in the study, they weigh what they know, what they feel, and what they expect. In real life, waiting is rarely about a single choice. It's about patterns over time. A person may save money in one area, but overspend in another. They may stick with a goal for months, and then give up when life gets hard. Delay of gratification is not fixed. It can change with age, practice, and context. It can also shift with motivation. People are more likely to wait when the reward feels real, meaningful, and within reach. Some schools and parents now teach delay of gratification as part of social-emotional learning. They help children build routines, set goals, and manage emotions. These efforts aim to support the skills behind waiting, like planning, resisting distraction, and handling discomfort. The focus is not on judging children, but on helping them grow. In the end, the marshmallow test still offers insight. It reminds us that choices are shaped by more than impulse. They reflect beliefs, strategies, and surroundings. Waiting is not just about willpower. It's about trust, experience, and support. What children do with a marshmallow in a quiet room can't tell us everything, but it can start a conversation about how people learn to balance the present and the future, and how we can help them do it better. The affect heuristic is a mental shortcut people use when making decisions. Instead of carefully weighing the facts, people often rely on how they feel. If something feels good, they assume it is safe or beneficial. If something feels bad, they assume it is risky or harmful. This emotional response, called affect, guides judgment more than logic does. The brain uses feelings as a quick signal, especially when there's too much information to sort through or time is limited. Researchers Paul Slovic, Melissa Finucane, Ellen Peters, and Donald McGregor helped develop the concept. They found that people judge the risks and benefits of a situation based on how they feel about it, not just on data or evidence. For example, if someone has a strong dislike for nuclear power, they may assume it has high risks and few benefits. If they like the idea of organic food, they may assume it has low risks and many benefits, even if they haven't looked at detailed research. The emotion colors the perception. This shortcut helps people make quick choices, but it can also lead to errors. One example is the fear of flying. Many people feel anxious about airplanes because crashes are dramatic and often covered in the news. The strong negative emotion tied to the idea of a plane crash leads them to judge flying as dangerous. But statistics show that air travel is much safer than driving. The risk is low, but the fear is high. The affect heuristic overrides the actual numbers. It also works in the opposite direction. People may feel good about a new technology, product, or idea, and therefore assume it's safe or useful, even if they know little about it. If a company uses calming colors, friendly faces, and appealing music in an ad, people may trust the product more, even if the product has serious flaws. The good feeling transfers to the judgment. This happens even when people think they are being rational. This shortcut appears in health decisions as well. A person might avoid getting a vaccine because they heard a story about someone having a bad reaction. Even if they know that the odds of harm are low and the benefits are high, the emotional impact of the story makes the risk feel bigger. Another person might use a supplement with no proven effect because it feels right or is endorsed by someone they admire. The emotional reaction shapes the choice more than the evidence does. The affect heuristic works fast and often without awareness. People don't usually say, "I'm making this choice because it feels good." They believe they are making a logical decision. But the feeling comes first, and then the reasoning follows. Often, people look for facts that support the feeling they already have. This reinforces the original judgment and makes it harder to change. Consider how this works in politics. If someone feels positively about a politician or party, they are more likely to see the associated policies as good, even without knowing the details. If they dislike a public figure, they may reject everything that person supports. The feeling acts as a filter. This affects not only what people believe, but also what they choose to learn or avoid. Marketers and advertisers use the affect heuristic all the time. They focus on creating positive feelings around a product using humor, beauty, music, or storytelling. These cues are not tied to the product's function, but still influence how people judge it. A beverage ad may show friends laughing on a beach. Viewers connect the good feeling with the drink, even if they know the scene is staged. Later, they may prefer that brand, not because they compared ingredients, but because it feels better. In public policy, the affect heuristic can create challenges. Efforts to educate the public with facts may not work if people's feelings are already strong. For example, trying to explain the safety of vaccines with charts and numbers may have little effect on someone who feels afraid. The fear came first and shaped how they interpret the facts. To shift the view, it often helps to connect with people emotionally, using stories, trusted voices, or images that match their concerns. This heuristic also plays a role in how people assess personal risk. After hearing about a shark attack, someone may avoid swimming in the ocean. They know the chance of an attack is tiny, but the image sticks in their mind. The emotion makes the risk feel real. At the same time, they may feel fine driving fast on a highway. Even though the statistical risk is higher, the road feels familiar and under control, so it doesn't trigger fear. The feeling, not the data, drives the decision. The affect heuristic is linked to memory as well. Events that trigger strong emotions, either positive or negative, tend to be remembered more clearly. When making decisions, people draw on those memories. If a person once had a bad reaction to a medication, they may avoid it forever, even if doctors say it's safe. A memory of the discomfort is stronger than the new information. This can be useful in avoiding real danger, but can also lead to overly cautious or irrational choices. Understanding this shortcut can help people make better decisions. One way is to pause and ask, am I reacting based on how I feel or what I know? This question doesn't stop the emotional reaction, but it brings it into awareness. If a choice feels too good or too bad to question, that may be a sign to step back and look at the facts. Another way is to seek out neutral information or talk to others who don't share the same emotional reaction. This can widen the perspective. The affect heuristic doesn't only lead to mistakes, it also helps people survive. Emotions can be useful signals. Fear can alert someone to danger. Trust can guide them toward safe or helpful people. In everyday life, people don't have time to analyze every option in detail. The affect heuristic speeds up the process, but it works best when the emotional response is accurate. When the feeling is based on a distorted image, old memory, or biased message, the decision may suffer. In education, helping students understand how emotion affects judgment can build better reasoning skills. Teachers can show how stories, images, and tone influence what people believe, even when the facts are the same. This builds critical thinking and media literacy. Students learn not just to ask, "Is this true?" but also, "Why do I feel this way about it?" That question opens a deeper layer of insight. In therapy or counseling, clients may explore how emotional reactions affect choices in relationships, work, or health. A person who avoids conflict might base that on a feeling that disagreement is dangerous. A person who repeats harmful patterns may do so because a choice feels familiar. Unpacking the emotional cues behind decisions can help people make choices that reflect their values, not just their reactions. The affect heuristic shows that people are not cold calculators. They make decisions with both heart and mind. Feelings are not the enemy of reason, but when they drive choices without question, they can lead people away from good outcomes. By recognizing the role of emotion in judgment, people can learn to balance instinct with thought and feeling with fact. This awareness doesn't remove the emotion, but it gives people more control over what they do with it.